Hey, Bitcoin wealth builders. Welcome to Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 92. We're going to be discussing everything about the plan that I see unfolding with BlackRock and the Middle Eastern Gulf nations and how that relates to what we're seeing right now in the UK and European Union surveillance state, with the UK being the beta test for what needs to be rolled out around the world. And we're going to dig deep into how these different subjects impact both everything that happened this week in Bitcoin, this week in macro, and this week in geopolitics. If you are new to Bitcoin Hard Talk, welcome to episode 92. This is the hardest talk about the hardest form of money as we transition to a world of Bitcoin AI and central bank digital currencies. If we haven't met already, welcome. My name is Simon Dixon. I spent the last 25 years of my life obsessing over the topic of investing and money, and 14 years in Bitcoin, speaking at the first Bitcoin conference and writing the first published book in the world to include Bitcoin. So let's take a little bit of a deep dive into what we're going to be covering today. Alongside everything that happened in this week in Bitcoin, the overarching theme is going to be Bitcoin versus the surveillance state and how to protect yourself. In part two, when we do this week in macro, I'm going to be going through all of the trade deals that have happened. We're now at the deadline with many of the global trade deals and the economic plan around the global surveillance state as it relates to everything that happened this week in macro. And in part three, we're going to be doing this week in geopolitics. And that's where I'm going to go through how BlackRock and the Gulf Wealth are building the UK and EU surveillance state. So you've got the theme of surveillance is going to be popping up with everything, but we're going to tie it all together by following the money so that we can get more prepared for this world of Bitcoin AI and central bank digital currencies. So let's jump right in with part one of Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 92, this week in Bitcoin. So we were promised this week from America, there was a big bunch of hype around the White House is going to be releasing their long-awaited crypto report. And obviously the speculation that many wanted is to find out how many Bitcoin the US government owns. It's kind of become like a bit of a mystery, a bit like Fort Knox audit, never to be audited, a bit like the Federal Reserve audit, never to be audited, a bit like the Pentagon $1 trillion that just poof, disappears in the air. Suddenly, America's Bitcoin strategic reserves have got lost in a boating accident. So we're allegedly down to 28,000 is the latest information from the last Freedom of Information request. And I covered this in previous episodes of Bitcoin Hard Talk, so we're not going to cover that today. However, the report didn't include anything to do with the Bitcoin strategic reserve, which is what I think most people were looking for. Well, if you're a lawyer, or if you're involved in crypto scams, or if you're involved in launching stablecoins or tokenizing real world assets, or getting involved in all the different iterations of fiat currency on a blockchain, or if you're a bank or if you're a financial institution, then you would have loved the crypto report because it really outlines some of the things that America's going to do to be the center of crypto. And all that really matters from your perspective is that you get to own Bitcoin in self-custody while you leave everyone else to create these fiat currency debt-based Ponzi schemes with blockchain assets that sit on top of the equivalent of fiat currency, pre-mined shitcoins. And obviously there's going to be a little bit of a stable coin that makes it easy to send it around as they take these real world assets, tokenize them so that BlackRock can usher in this mass surveillance state of programmable digital assets and programmable money. And you get to resist against it with peaceful proof of work by owning more Bitcoin this month than the previous month and learning how to hold it in self-custody rather than hold it in custody with BlackRock. But anyway, just like Bulgaria, which we've covered over the years, it's kind of become a long-standing joke. The government of Bulgaria seized a couple of 100,000 Bitcoin back in the day. And it could have been used as their strategic reserve assets. And in fact, at today's price, it would exceed the national debt of Bulgaria. However, it seemed like they disappeared in a boating accident and some politicians ended up with the private key and Bulgaria doesn't have it on its balance sheet. So I haven't yet to see an item line on the US government's treasury balance sheet that includes some Bitcoin. Once it's known, once it's audited, it can go there as a Bitcoin strategic reserve. But it's kind of anyone's guess for now. We're having more and more adoption, more and more warnings from the traditional TradFi players. As far as it goes in TradFi, Ray Dalio has been the billionaire hedge fund manager, and he's always been warning of a change of world order, a change of empire. And he's done some great content. I recommend his books, anyone that's interested in, changing order and some of the stuff around principles and various other stuff. I think he puts out some good content there as well. But the billionaire Ray Dalio, he's always had like this, he's been the manager of sovereign wealth funds and hedge funds and various other things. When Trump went on the tour, he's certainly one of those people that comes along when he was touring across the Middle East and the Gulf nations. But Ray Dalio came out, and for the first time, I followed his journey all along. Initially, he thought Bitcoin won't succeed because the government has guns. It was kind of like a Jim Rogers type of ideology. He understood the economics. He believes in gold and commodities, and he believes that there is a changing world order. He believes that there is he was forecasting and getting people ahead of the China trade relative to the American trade. And he's always been warning about what will happen to the dollar in terms of deep monetization as we enter into this fiscal dominance era that tends to lead to civil unrest. But he was always recommending an allocation to commodities to be protected during these changing world orders. His philosophy is cash is trash, but he also had a bit of a bond, stock portfolio with an allocation to commodities. But now he's recommending, based upon Bitcoin's position today, that commodity portfolio should consist of Bitcoin. And in fact, he recommends that investors today should have a 15% portfolio allocation to Bitcoin as a hedge against devaluation from the Federal Reserve and the debt-based Ponzi scheme. So it's pretty interesting to see Ray Dalio's journey to now getting to a 15% allocation to Bitcoin. At the same time, we had the financial terrorist, or the puppet chairman of the Federal Reserve, that essentially is there to announce what the banks want him to do every quarter, because the Federal Reserve works for its shareholders, and its shareholders are the banks that have those accounts with the Federal Reserve. But the sitting duck chair, Jerome Powell, who's about to leave, he came out and said that Bitcoin is like gold. It's digital gold, which is interesting to hear from the Fed chairman. Now that BlackRock is accumulating its position after Operation Choke Point 2.0, where the Federal Reserve, the SEC, and BlackRock took down the crypto markets, wiped out many of the crypto-friendly banks so that they could launch their Bitcoin ETF and launch their own regulatory regime under the new Trump administration, where banks get to put Bitcoin on their balance sheet. And BlackRock, transitioning to this multipolar world, has been getting all of their clients into Bitcoin. But of course, those TradFi clients are not holding it in self-custody. They're holding it with BlackRock, in essentially making BlackRock the custodian via the public company Coinbase, which myself and Bank to the Future investors were shareholders in right in the very early days when our market was a lot smaller than what it is today, where the sharks are all swimming around and saying, we destroyed our fiat currency, we've taken our proof of weapons network, and we have inflicted violence and war around the world. And eventually that's going to no longer work. So we're looking for our new host nation. But in the meantime, let's protect ourselves with Bitcoin and protect our clients with Bitcoin. But fortunately, Satoshi Nakamoto anticipated this and said, we're going to create an algorithm called proof of work rather than what the other coins are created on called proof of stake, which means that it doesn't matter who actually owns it. The most you can do with a large position is you can sell that position or you can borrow against it or create some derivatives against it, which means that only in the short term can you engage in price manipulation. And guess what? When you're dealing with a fixed currency supply, where 74% of the Bitcoins are held by long-term holders and 70% of the wallets are out there in self-custody from people that nobody knows who they are, it becomes a very hard asset to manipulate long-term. And you can only engage in short-term manipulation just to persuade you to sell your Bitcoin to them and borrow against your Bitcoin so they can margin call you and steal your Bitcoin. But you like it when the price of Bitcoin goes down because it means that you're valuing your wealth in Bitcoin. And when you earn your fiat currency every month, as the price goes down, you get to buy more Bitcoin with your fiat currency. Measure your wealth in Bitcoin, not dollars. Don't fall for the optical illusion of measuring your wealth in a deflating ice cube called fiat currency that's based upon a debt-based Ponzi scheme and destroys your wealth. And when you're measuring your wealth in stock market and all the other financial weapons that are used to pull together your money and get Wall Street to manage it for you, it looks like stocks are going up, when in reality, if you price it in Bitcoin or you price it in gold, you realize that you're not getting ahead on the treadmill. It's just an optical illusion because of the weakening and devaluation of the dollar and its purchasing power. We had a little message from El Salvador. We're tracking El Salvador in terms of Bukele having to bow down to the International Monetary Fund and the economic hitmen over there, because unfortunately they didn't have enough Bitcoin strategic reserves. But at the same time, they're claiming that they're building and adding to 1 Bitcoin every day to their strategic reserve. But the IMF says they're not. They're just shuffling around Bitcoin. So we'll keep watching it. And Bukele changed the law in El Salvador so that he can have a second, not just a second term, a third term, but it will last over 6 years as well. But he's been advising other governments as well. And so there was a deal that was signed between El Salvador and Bolivia. And they signed in order to integrate Bitcoin and crypto into Bolivia's financial system. Now, El Salvador has built their economy around a Bitcoin first type of approach, which is the right approach. You can mess around with the shitcoin casino. You can do some stable coins. You can do the things that you need to do. But when it comes to legal tender, Bitcoin is the game. When it comes to treasury reserves, Bitcoin is the game. And so we'll start to see what types of activity we get in Bolivia. But upon the announcement, there was approximately a 6x surge in basically, since Bolivia in 2024 had a ban. And so these countries are now capitulating. They're banning in order to control. And now they're embracing. And there's been about a 6x increase in activity from a complete ban to where it is right now, where it's working with El Salvador to see how Bitcoin can be integrated to allow it to protect itself from the bad options of the International Monetary Fund or China's Belt and Road Initiative. You can use your own Bitcoin sovereign strategy. Now, while I prefer to separate state and money, and Bitcoin gives us that option, it also is Bitcoin is for everybody. So if countries want to protect themselves and remain more sovereign, then they can also use Bitcoin as well. And this is basically another nation that's working with Bukele's team in order to build a Bitcoin-based economy. So we will keep tracking that. The country with the largest Bitcoin per capita in the world is the Kingdom of Bhutan, that has used their hydropower in order to generate electricity to mine Bitcoin, where approximately 50% of the country's GDP is held in a Bitcoin strategic reserve. So speaking of some of the companies that are using treasuries, so we now have talked about this, approximately 1 million Bitcoin of the 21 million now is held on the balance sheet of over 100 public companies. And one of those, I think the second largest, is the Bitcoin miner Marathon, MARA. Now, they're actually a really bad Bitcoin miner when you look at the stats, but you get to use the illusion of the debt capital markets and the equity capital markets to extract a bunch of value and pay yourself shit tons of money in salary and stock options, as long as you can keep raising capital, which is what these US public miners do. And so they're looking to raise another $1 billion in order to buy some more Bitcoin. I'm not recommending anyone to invest in all of these, introducing counterparty risk between you and the perfect asset, which you can understand, where Bitcoin only will ever have 21 million. And as more people lose them, the supply actually contracts. Hopefully you won't be one of those people that lose them. We're going to be, I'm actually going to be working. One of the most frequent questions I get is, Simon, how do you self-custody your Bitcoin? Don't worry, I got you covered. We've created content back in the day with some of my contacts where we go through all of the security rules to make sure you don't lose your Bitcoin, unpack a box of a hardware wallet, and show you all the considerations to start with and as your wealth grows. I think we're going to be uploading that. In fact, I think we've already uploaded that into the completely free Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal, and you can get your free login at simondixon.com. The reason we put it behind the login is because we are massively shadow banned on our channel. In fact, we did a little bit of an experiment. This week, I did an interview on George Gammon channel. He's a financial analyst. And on the channel where he does his interviews, Renegade Capital, he had approximately 16,500 subscribers. That video has now had over 100,000 views. And so we thought we'd experiment. What if we take the same video and call it the exact same title and put it on my YouTube video, which has 100,000 subscribers? And guess what? Now you got us to 100,000 subscribers. We got our little plaque. So congratulations. Thank you all to everybody that has shared on this journey to getting us to 100,000 subscribers. So we uploaded the video, and I was covering, I'm going to do a little AI review in part one of that video so you can get the TLDR summary in case you don't have time to watch it, and also point you to where you can watch it as well.
Hey, Simon, just a quick correction. You said Renegade Capital. It's Rebel Capitalist.
Rebel Capitalist. Thanks, Azad. Okay, so we would have sent everyone to another YouTube channel, Rebel Capitalist. Sorry, George, if you're watching. So thank you, Azad saved the day to make sure we sent you to the right place. Right, so we took the same video with the same title and uploaded it to our YouTube channel, which has approximately 101,000 subscribers now. And the same video that got 100,000 views on a YouTube channel with 16,500 subscribers only got 10,000 views, because we rely 100% on having to mail our list and tell you about our videos, because YouTube doesn't want you to know what we got to say. So it just shows you categorically with proof that YouTube doesn't like what we're saying. So with that in mind, that's why if we ever get banned after these shadow bans, make sure you've got your free login at simondixon.com, because we've even set up a backup infrastructure where we can go live from within the portal, if just in case. We're preparing for that day, because we want to make sure no matter what they say, no matter what they do, you are prepared for a world of Bitcoin AI and central bank digital currencies. And so, yeah, that little experiment there as well. Right, now, speaking of Bitcoin mining, I think there's another interesting thing we need to watch as well in the Bitcoin mining industry, which is that if you understand, and in 2013, I launched my first Bitcoin mining operation in Iceland, way back in the day. Wow, 12 years ago now. One of the most important cost is obviously electricity. And then you got to purchase equipment, and you got to cool that equipment, and you got to have uptime, which involves setting up an infrastructure. It's a very hard business to run. But with tariffs, it kind of dawned upon me that, of course, the most expensive thing is electricity when you're doing your Bitcoin mining operation. But before, you used to have to sell all your Bitcoin in the market because you would have to, your electricity provider probably doesn't accept Bitcoin. And if they do accept Bitcoin, they'd want you to convert it into fiat currency, or they'd convert it into fiat currency. So the Bitcoin miners historically were one of the largest sources of sellers of Bitcoin. And we recently had this 80,000 Bitcoin, the historical trade from a 2011 wallet, and they sold $9 billion worth of Bitcoin. But the reason it didn't affect the price is because over the counter, there's a lot of demand for Bitcoin. And in fact, there is significantly more demand for Bitcoin at the moment than the miners that need to sell their Bitcoin to pay their electricity bills. So the reason we're having this changing dynamics in Bitcoin at the moment is because you still got a fixed supply. But when miners want to sell their Bitcoin, they're probably selling them over the counter, and they're selling them to basically this constant bid of Bitcoin treasury companies that now want to manage their, rather than having dollars, they want Bitcoin on their balance sheet, particularly around some of the changes in rules that are happening with the accounting that I'll go through today. But essentially, the mined Bitcoins to pay for the electricity are going over the counter, and they're never really hitting the exchange. So there's no oppression of the price based upon the miners needing some dollars to cover their electricity cost. And in fact, there is excess. There is not enough newly mined Bitcoin relative to people that want to buy those in those over-the-counter trades. And so this is one of the reasons why we're getting this steady uptrend in Bitcoin. Now, of course, that can reverse. When the market cracks, they need to sell more Bitcoin. And maybe as the price goes down, they'll look to get it at cheaper rates. But right now, the dynamics of the market is the Bitcoin treasury companies are buying more Bitcoin than is available to the miners that need to sell that Bitcoin, which is having a significant reduction in the sell pressure. Now, also, let's think about the dynamics at the moment. Approximately 1/3 of Bitcoin mining happens in America, particularly Texas, because they're using it to stabilize the grid. And during times of when Texas needs excess electricity, they can purchase it off the miners. And when there is wasted electricity, the miners are able to monetize that electricity. So it's really helping them stabilize the grid and manage it a lot better. But the machines required to mine Bitcoin, they are all manufactured in China. So approximately 90% of all ASICs are purchased from China, which means that if any of the American Bitcoin miners under a China tariff deal would like to upgrade their equipment and receive that machinery, I'm assuming that's going to be subject to the US tariffs. And so this is going to add significant cost to the US Bitcoin miners. And this is something we need to consider because many people ahead of the Liberation Day on April the 1st, many companies were trying to front run those tariffs, which is what led to a manipulation of the figures. And now we're starting to see that. I'll be covering that more in the macro section. But you can imagine the same things happening with these Bitcoin miners and ASICs. So any tariff on Bitcoin miners that need to, where the ASIC manufacturers will just charge it onto America because they can choose who to sell it to. They sell it to miners in other jurisdictions, but they want to sell it to the same price to Americans. So they'll have to pay whatever the tariff is. Let's say it works out at 30%. Then they'll have to factor in that their machinery is 30% more expensive relative to other miners. And so it essentially is a tax on mining Bitcoin within America. And it'll be interesting to watch whether the Bitcoin or crypto lobby do anything about that and what actually comes at the end of it. Now, we'll cover it more in the macro, but at the moment, the tariff with China has been extended out for another 90 days or so. Speaking of which, we hit record highs in Bitcoin mining. the hash rate, the security behind the Bitcoin network, this distributed supercomputer that is geographically located around the world, that means that no government, no central bank, no one player can take down the security behind Bitcoin. It has now hit 1 zettahash per second. I don't know how to exactly explain that, but this is by the largest distributed supercomputer by orders of magnitude that exists today. And that provides all the security behind Bitcoin and this proof of work network, which makes it 100% unique relative to anything else that anyone tries to launch, to either try and compete with Bitcoin or even try to run any kind of attack vector on Bitcoin. It is now absolutely infeasible to put together any type of budget to take down Bitcoin, and the economic incentives just don't line up relative to what you can do as well, plus the geographical location, plus it's just economically infeasible. So speaking of which, everybody needs to jump on board. So all of the different types of companies, they're figuring out, can I put Bitcoin on my balance sheet as a treasury asset? Or am I going to engage in the shitcoin casino and maybe launch stable coins so that I can receive a bunch of yield from the debt-based Ponzi scheme of the US government? If you want to go over to my blog where I did content with George Gammon, I put together a whole blog. I'll do an AI summary at the end of part 1 on that, but you can watch if you're really interested in this topic. We went really deep into the implication on the Federal Reserve balance sheet, the US debt, surveillance, all sorts of stuff. We went deep into the implications for those that want to dive deep. But obviously, every company now wants to launch a stable coin. You get to have free government treasuries, and then you get to take the yield on the government debt and convert it to Bitcoin and hold Bitcoin on your balance sheet. So with that in mind, we're getting a flurry of innovation from the tech companies and the fintech companies and the banks that are looking to adjust to this new paradigm. And so PayPal has basically come out and said that they're now allowing merchants. So when you're paying using PayPal, the merchants are going to be able to accept crypto payments. So whenever you make a payment, you'll see another option. It will be like card, use your PayPal account. And if the merchant wants to accept crypto, I'm sure they'll have an automatic exchange as well, or you can accept the Bitcoin direct as well, which is awesome because earning Bitcoin for your company is a great way when you can manage that treasury and have your long-term savings. So rather than being in the debt-based Ponzi scheme, you can start to accumulate wealth for your company with these Bitcoin treasuries based upon keeping a fraction of your margin within Bitcoin. Now, what are we starting to see? The biggest brokers, they're now thinking, well, I remember, what happened with the Bitcoin exchanges. Once we had stable coins, we realized we could go from one exchange like Bitfinex to another exchange like Kraken to another exchange like Coinbase without having to touch the banking system. And the way we did that, of course, was with stable coins, because stable coins you're able to send between these exchanges, and you don't need to get permission from a bank and have these 5 days and KYC and all this problems in between. And so it started to really open up liquidity when you could make all these different exchanges interoperable, and it made them all better as well. And so we're starting to now see, I think, the first signs of that in the traditional broker business. So one of the largest discount online brokers in America is called Interactive Brokers. And they now said that they're considering launching their own stablecoin. Now, they don't need to launch their own stablecoin. They could just use an existing stablecoin. But now you should, once this goes through, you'll be able to go on-ramp into a stablecoin, convert it into shares, and get it out, and then maybe go from a stablecoin to another exchange, maybe E-Trade or something else. And this is one of the largest online retail brokerage in the whole US as well. I remember the days when they wouldn't even allow you to deposit funds if it came from Bitcoin. Boy, how things are changing. It's kind of like just moving money between exchanges as easy as sending an email which means that opens up to competition and allows us to put our assets where we need to when we trade them. And obviously, if you hold it in Bitcoin, you can self-custody. But this made the industry really open up in the crypto exchange industry. Maybe the same will happen with the brokerage industry. And speaking of brokerage, we had Robinhood, one of the companies I invested in very early in private equity. It's now heading up to new all-time highs as a result of these different trends that are happening as well. Another fintech company, eToro, they launched in Europe. They're now going to be using tokenized US stocks, just like Kraken did. So rather than having a stock market that is open during market hours, you can now tokenize a stock, make a market in it using a tokenized asset, and it can trade 24/7. And eventually, as more and more brokerages do the same, you can probably go from one brokerage to another, and then you can transfer those assets between exchanges, which has been a horrific process in the past. If you've ever tried to take your stock from one broker to another, particularly if you're in a offshore jurisdiction, or maybe you did it via a tax efficient trust structure, nightmare. It can be one of the hardest processes to get that, and just a paperwork nightmare. But now with these tokenized assets, and they said eToro is going to be doing it on the Ethereum blockchain as well. Speaking of which, $26 billion bank in, what's it called? Rack Bank, which is now become the first bank in UAE. So many of the companies were going over to Dubai. And one of the biggest problems with it is the banks were still not on board. This has been a consistent problem. You can have a government and a jurisdiction that wants to embrace the industry, but often governments are subordinate to banks. And so banks can end up choking the industry, as has happened many times over the last 14 years, has happened on the Isle of Man and many, many different places as well throughout the whole history. But UAE has now got its first bank to offer Bitcoin and crypto trading natively within the bank. Look, I'm advocating for Bitcoin in self-custody. I will always call out the TradFi, banksters, but the financial terrorists are all coming in to help you get your dirty fiat currency from the proof of weapons network and convert it into peaceful proof of work, which hopefully you'll take the lessons, not store with them, and we can demonetize and boycott the system. But for now, we need to go from our dirty fiat currency proof of weapons network, war mind, death, destruction, genocidal currency, and convert it into something where we can boycott and drain the swamp, as it were. Now, speaking of Bitcoin Treasury, the number one company has been MicroStrategy, now known as Strategy, and they purchased this week 21,021 Bitcoin for approximately $2.4 billion. So they're still buying. As they said, they will always be buying the top because they know that Bitcoin fixed supply and the stock to flow ratio and the economics historically. And so the average price that they paid for their $2.4 billion of Bitcoin is $117,256 per Bitcoin. So that gives Strategy, the public company, tradable upon the NASDAQ, 628,791 Bitcoin. And they've acquired those for an average of 73,277 per Bitcoin. And guess what? When Bitcoin was 72,000, everyone said it's too late. I've missed the boat. It can't go any higher. As many people will be saying now at the prices today. As they were saying when it was $10, $100, $1,000, $100,000, $10,000. Everybody feels the same, but we don't focus on price. Your job is to own more Bitcoin this month than the previous month. Do that for a minimum of 4 years. Review in 4 years' time and realize you most likely beat the shit out of every asset class that exists, and you didn't need any Wall Street banksters stealing money from you in between. And that's what I want for everybody. I can't promise that will happen again in the future, but I've been saying this since 2011, and everybody that has done that has either gone at the extreme to billionaires, millionaires, and has, at least escaped the debt cycle. And now they're looking at, they're deciding whether to borrow against their Bitcoin to buy a house or just buy it outright. I say buy it outright. I can't give you financial advice, but it means you can drain the swamp of the banks if you don't take your Bitcoin, collateralize it, and borrow against it. Anyway, we had the strategy earnings call yesterday, and this is the first earnings call under the new FASB rules. The new FASB rules, pretty geeky. Essentially, it allows you to book your Bitcoin growth for the first time on a US public company, and you can book it as earnings. So if you own some Bitcoin and that Bitcoin goes up in price, previously you weren't able to book any of that, and you'd have to actually book it at the lowest price of Bitcoin, which is a bit of a stupid accounting process because it doesn't reflect the reality of the company. But now with the FASB rule, like it or love it or think, you can now book that as earnings as well when it basically goes up. Now, when it goes down, you'll have to do negative earnings as well. But this is the first time that a public company in the US has been able to utilize this, and the earnings were in the multiples of billions as well as a result of this print. What it also means is that companies that analyze Wall Street companies, with all of these hundreds of Bitcoin treasury companies, would probably need to start figuring out how to analyze earnings potential. And when analyzing this earnings potential, it will have to start figuring out how to model the price of Bitcoin. This is going to have to be factored into the equation now, which means that there needs to be sophisticated modeling just as a result of these accounting processes. Just like Berkshire Hathaway, one of the Warren Buffett's company, they have to always mark their assets as earnings, and this is how Bitcoin will be done now, just the same way. So it basically makes Bitcoin treated in a similar way, and it can be all done with Bitcoin now. So this is a new accounting process as a result of this as well. This can even end up, really creating new demand for Bitcoin. Now there will be a model to do that. And if those that have Bitcoin on their balance sheet as treasury are outperforming the standard operating companies, like Tesla owns Bitcoin on its balance sheet, now it's got a model to increase its earnings. We know that public companies like to play financial shenanigans. And every quarter, based upon their earnings, they get to unlock, if the share price increases, their share options. And so this is why I don't recommend messing around with these human counterparty businesses, because you always add the corrupt human in the middle and all the shenanigans that you can't model. But as a result of this, you can imagine many public companies will look to adjust based upon superior earnings and superior stats, just based upon the having these treasury companies. And obviously that can work in reverse as well. So we'll start to see that as well. This essentially changes the earnings per share, which is the normal calculation that people use in modeling share prices, for strategy. So we'll look forward and we'll keep covering it. It's an interesting model. As again, you don't need to be involved in any of this stuff. I just want to keep you up to date so you can understand where the demand for this Bitcoin is coming, moving into the future, because there's only so many Bitcoin and there is more demand right now at the moment. So the only way to pay for that Bitcoin is to pay a higher price. And as long as you're buying Bitcoin each and every month, you can dollar cost average and ignore the price. But at the same earnings call, there was another announcement from Strategy. They're raising $4.2 billion rather than $2.1 billion for their next financial product. That cap table is looking pretty complicated. You better be pretty sophisticated to analyze the risk of this thing. But they have their earning calls, and people, and this is how it's working. Now, the other companies, the copycats of strategy, they're getting ready. So the other big one is the partnership between SoftBank, Cantor Fitzgerald, Jack Mallers, and Tether. I've covered that many times. Go back to some of my videos where I talk about the banks want your Bitcoin, of why I think that's a really bad move. And Jack Mallers is kind of being used as a patsy in front of some of the the deep state actors, let's call it, if you're familiar with my content. But the Bitcoin native new public company is called 21, and it's set to go public, and it's going to have 43,500 Bitcoin, which is going to include another 5,800 from Tether as well. And so that's set to go public as well and put those Bitcoin in, and that will make it the third largest US public corporate Bitcoin treasury company holder. That's a mouthful, isn't it? Number one, strategy. Number two, marathon, which we covered in the beginning. And then number three should be 21. So 21 Capital is also looking at what is their operating business model, as well as holding Bitcoin. And of course, because it is partnering with the financial terrorists at Cantor Fitzgerald, the debt dealers like to deal with some debt. And so, of course, they're looking at Bitcoin-backed loans and allowing you to take out some dollars, some dirty fiat dollars to cover your operational costs by locking up some Bitcoin with them. And I told you, remember, the whole complex gets built. And then you've got the financial terrorists like Howard Lutnick and Cantor Fitzgerald and SoftBanks. They're able to build this different complex. And eventually, I put the warnings out there. They can manipulate the price short term in order to give you a margin call. So if you're engaging in these financial weapons of mass destruction, make sure that it's only with a small percentage of your Bitcoin, and you are managing your Bitcoin as if the when you hand it over, things can go wrong. The big problem with Celsius and BlockFi is people were putting their entire life savings, borrowing against it, and trying to get yield on it, which is a different type of model, which we're not going to go into. But we will go through one of the lawsuits that's progressing as a result of the Celsius bankruptcy. The last time these Bitcoin-backed loans went terribly wrong, and people ended up in a massive bankruptcy process. I'm speaking from experience. I'm the 7th largest creditor, and Maszynski, that goes to prison next month for 12 years for that debt-based Ponzi scheme, still owes approximately, I think if we took the value of the Bitcoin, we'd be looking at over probably $100 million that guy owes me. Some of it came back, and I had to lobby the court for a couple of years to make sure that the Bitcoin was retained, which is what saved many of the creditors. And now there's a court case. I'll go through that in a little bit. That's part of This Week in Bitcoin as well. Now, I've been warning you against these Genius Act, and I talked about the surveillance state and the different types of integrations. And looking at the TradFi players that are all going to be getting into stable coins. Now, when you're messing around with your spending money, I don't mind. You can separate your saving money and your spending money. And when it comes to spending money, fiat currency has a purpose. I limit the amount of fiat currency that I have. I definitely don't save in fiat currency. That's a recipe for financial disaster. But in terms of your spending money, there's going to be the ability to use Stripe as a merchant, which is one of the largest merchant processors where you can take card payments as a business. And then in the future, you'll be able to pull it out as stable coins. And once it goes into stable coins, you can then programmatically earn Bitcoin. All of this innovation is to come as well. But we had an announcement, and I said, but there is a trade-off. It's going to be complete surveilled. It's going to have artificial intelligence integrations, and it's going to usher in this 1984 totalitarian type of economy based upon these AI integrations. And immediately, Stripe made an announcement stating that Stripe is accelerating the utility of artificial intelligence and stablecoins with its next major launches. And so we are moving to that world, and it is happening just as fast. Remember, and I'm going to cover the blog post where I went deep into this with George Gammon, but remember, with Stripe, follow the money, who were the early investors? The PayPal mafia. The PayPal mafia that we were talking about that's integrating into crypto payments. And both Elon Musk, one of the co-founders of the PayPal mafia, and Peter Thiel, the CIA and Mossad-backed operative that gets to use the surveillance state technology that it's privatizing with Palantir to usher in crimes against humanity, funded by state and a big, beautiful bill. He was also part of the PayPal mafia, and they were both seed investors in Stripe. And so what else do we know about Stripe? Well, Stripe, I said they acquired a stablecoin provider, and that stablecoin provider uses BlackRock in order to manage their treasury and money market funds. So now you've got this combination of Stripe payments, integrations with artificial intelligence, the investors being Elon Musk, the social credit score guy, and Peter Thiel, the crimes against humanity, war criminal, Palantir, surveillance state, border protection, surveillance state guy. And you've got BlackRock, the manager of the proof of weapons network, all coming together in order to put together the financial infrastructure for Stripe, stablecoins ecosystem via its acquisition of a company called Bridge. And so that Orwellian nightmare is all coming together now that they've got Genius Act, and the crypto lobby has lobbied the Trump administration to print the money with the big, beautiful bill in order to usher in this surveillance state. Now, of course, in the SEC, Gary Gensler is out, the operator of the person that allowed Operation Choke Point 2.0 to happen, the corrupt one that only met Sam Bankman-Fried from FTX and wouldn't meet anyone else in the industry, that supported this ushering in of BlackRock ETFs and the hostile takeover of part of the centralized infrastructure of Bitcoin. The new chairman of the SEC has come out and said, with its crypto-friendly stance, based upon the White House crypto report, based upon the crypto SAR as well, that the SEC is saying that US is going to tokenize everything, and they're going to tokenize all of the capital markets in America, which essentially means 24/7 programmable securities, which are going to be integrated with all this technology and stable coins that's being built. But now it will be 24/7 trading, and we're going to have this massive Orwellian tokenized securities, stable coins, covert central bank digital currencies, things that I covered last week. But it's all coming. At the same time, the SEC came out and officially allowed the ETFs, which is really interesting, to create a redeem feature of Bitcoin and Ethereum ETF. Now, what does that mean? It means that institutional investors, probably not you as a retail individual, but as an institutional ETF provider, you can go directly from Bitcoin ETF to Bitcoin. Now, if they don't allow you to do it, it means they could make you in these Bitcoin ETFs the bag holder, while they're able to pull out all of their Bitcoin and get into self-custody based upon some kind of insider information. And just with 9/11, you could find out who was involved in that operation by looking at the CIA and Mossad-backed financial institutions that were shorting the markets prior to that. You can look at these operations as we move into the future around who's pulling their self-custody Bitcoin out of the BlackRock Bitcoin IBIT ETF, and you'll be able to get some kind of indication of what's happening, which is why I say stay away. They can drain the swamp, go to self-custody, but they probably won't let you go to self-custody. But it is actually pretty remarkable that now they'll be able to settle directly into Bitcoin rather than cash settled and having to take it to dollars in a bank with all the slow things that can happening. Talking about banks, Standard Chartered says that Ethereum treasury companies could end up buying 10% of all ETH. Remember what I said? Ethereum is proof of stake, which means as ETFs purchase more Ethereum, they get to stake it and they get to control through covert operations the network, unlike Bitcoin, because it doesn't have this staking mechanism. Speaking of other stories as well, I told you earlier about Celsius and Mijinski that's going down for 12 years. There was progression with the lawsuit between the Celsius estate representing the bankruptcy, the victims of the Ponzi scheme, of which I'm the 7th largest creditor, but there's approximately 650,000 victims as well. They're progressing a lawsuit against Tether because essentially Celsius took client Bitcoin, posted it as collateral with Tether, and Tether issued $2 billion of stable coins as a loan against that Bitcoin as collateral. And this is the exact thing that I'm trying to warn you against, because I think this will be done at the institutional level with Cantor Fitzgerald and all of these different constructs. But anyway, the Celsius estate launched an update to that. They're looking to recover 39,542 Bitcoin from Tether. And it essentially said that what really happened is that they transferred them from Tether to their exchange Bitfinex. And this was, in bankruptcy terms, what's called a preferential and fraudulent transaction. What that means is when you're in bankruptcy, if you end up storing your Bitcoin with a company that ends up in bankruptcy, and 90 days prior to the bankruptcy, if you withdrew, they can claw back the funds. And obviously Tether, in doing this margin call against the loan that was issued with those stable coins, this is considered within the 90-day period, and therefore it's classified as under those preference, and therefore them taking those Bitcoin in order to sell them or liquidate them in a margin contract. Celsius is now claiming that this was improperly done, and it improperly favored Tether over all the other creditors. And so this is a violation of the federal bankruptcy laws, is the allegation. And Tether allegedly, basically, is the accusation, secretly transferred those assets, saying we sold them as a margin call to cover the loan. But all they did is they transferred them over from Tether to Bitfinex at what they're claiming was a discounted price for Bitcoin. And then they got to keep all the upside of the Bitcoin, which should have belonged to creditors as per the lawsuit. And so we'll keep tracking that lawsuit because it's an interesting one to watch, particularly as all of these companies are trying to persuade you to engage in proof of weapons, financial terrorism with your Bitcoin so that they can pull off the same tricks on you. And the lawyers in these bankruptcy have like a double whammy scam where they get to spend your Bitcoin on the bankruptcy court. And just to add suit to, ever since the bankruptcy ended, in engaging in these lawsuits, the lawyers keep money aside that belongs to customers, and they've spent another $158 million just pushing forward these cases. Now, if they end up recovering all of those Bitcoin, it will be worth it. But just a lesson to you on why you should self-custody, because the banks want your Bitcoin. And if you think that the shenanigans that the crypto companies were up to aren't going to be done on a higher scale with the blessing of the Federal Reserve and the proof of weapons network and the fractional reserve debt-based Ponzi schemes, I have a lovely war to sell you if you believe that as well. eToro, another financial technology company, they announced that they're going to be taking their stocks and they're going to be tokenizing them, and now they're going to be open 24/7 to anybody that wants to trade that. So essentially, it's transitioning the market to not being closed on weekends. and people will speculate over the weekend based upon the tokenized market being open, which will become like a forward market to the underlying shares. So it's going to add a new element of speculation and arbitrage. Now, I wanted to cover just a few more stories before we do the little AI summary, because I want to make sure you're up to date what's happening in this whole central bank digital currency / stablecoin world all around the world as well. So one of the projects that we've been tracking for a long time. Now, what was really interesting is there was an interview on Tucker Carlson with Richard Werner. He was someone that before I got in the Bitcoin community was part of the monetary reform community. And interestingly, there were three of us involved in the community pre-Bitcoin. We kind of forked off in different directions. Richard forked off in the direction because he was the inventor of quantitative easing and believed that QE works when banks create money for productive business loans, but they destroy the system when they're used for real estate, which is how it is used, and used for consumer debt, which just indebts the nation. And so it's unsustainable. That was his theory. But if it's used for business loans and productive loans, then you can outgrow the interest rate on the debt. Don't want to go too deep into that, but Tucker Carlson did an interview, and it just reminded me of those old monetary reform days prior to Bitcoin. When Bitcoin came along, it changed everything because I didn't have to persuade banksters and politicians of trying to get to something sustainable. We just got to opt out and build our own system. That's when monetary reform got exciting. But I remember three of us that were all involved in the monetary reform movement. I went over to the Bitcoin side and started advocating for everybody to go into Bitcoin. Richard criticized me because he was saying that Bitcoin is a CIA operation. I told him it's open source and it really doesn't matter because it's open source code using open source libraries on a distributed supercomputer with no backdoor where everyone gets to back up the node, and you can run any version of that code. And so therefore it doesn't really matter whether some of the technology like SHA-256 was created by open source libraries by intelligence agencies, but he took it that direction. And there was another guy, his name was Ben Dyson. He started working for the Bank of England, the real financial terrorist, and now works for the Bank for International Settlements, the real financial terrorists, the ones that literally funded Nazi Germany and created the European Union in order to destroy Europe and centralize it. And now he works on the project of a central bank global surveillance state technology using Enbridge at the Bank for International Settlements. So we went off in very different directions. Bitcoin and started advocating for Bitcoin. Then getting stuck in the intelligence and not understanding the tech with Richard. And then Ben went over to working with the real financial terrorists, destroying the world with central bank digital currencies. But anyway, what's interesting is Enbridge, the central bank digital currency platform that had its Hong Kong branch that integrated all of the different central bank digital currencies through the Bank for International Settlements, basically handed over the project to its member central banks. And so now the project is not managed by the Bank for International Settlements. As for geopolitical reasons, we're getting this independence with the different BRICS corridors. So China, Thailand, the UAE, and Hong Kong were involved in integrating their central bank digital currencies, but now the Bank for International Settlements has handed over the project. And so China has basically, looking across these different things that are happening in the CBDC world. In Europe, we're entering into a CBDC starting in October with a beta test. In America, they're moving over to this surveillance technocracy with stablecoins. With BRICS, they're going to be moving over to China launching a CBDC, but many of them have started to use Bitcoin to settle between each other and looking and exploring these different stablecoins. Now, America wants to dominate the dollar through stablecoins in order to try and keep and prop up the proof of weapons network. So we're going to enter into a big, ginormous currency war. And in a multipolar world, Bitcoin will be at the center of that because of its superiority over gold in terms of auditing different countries that don't trust each other and being able to transfer through multi-signature arrangements between these different central banks and financial institutions. Now, that doesn't matter to you because you own it in self-custody. But I just want to make sure you're keeping an eye on this as we transition to this world of central bank digital currency. Because China announced this week that they want to move forward with BRICS being able to remove or move closer and closer to removing their dependency upon the dollar. And part of BRICS is they haven't launched a currency, but 90% of all intra-BRICS trades are now switched to being done in their local currencies. And so what actual impact does that have? Well, 65% of all BRICS trades were done in the dollar, previously. And so now the BRICS share of, now we've got 90% of all those trades happening. And it went over $1 trillion worth of trades. And a lot of that, or part of that, is being done with crypto, stablecoin, and Bitcoin settlements as well. So where is that trend going? We need to keep an eye on this because I often talk about the multipolar world order, but I think we should really be looking at the latest stats we get. So BRICS share of global SWIFT payments increased to approximately 6.4%. So that means more of BRICS members are involved in those SWIFT payments that they're looking to create alternative cross-border payments for as well. And their settlements basically has increased to 15%. So this is a larger portion of the network as well. BRICS now accounts for 40% of global GDP when measured in PPP. And what PPP is, it takes GDP and it adjusts it for the cost of living. And so you have to adjust for the cost as well. So this is a increasing block in terms of its influence. If you take the G7, the top 7 Western economies, they've only got 28% of global GDP. BRICS has now 40%. And so they're growing at approximately 4% annually compared to 3.3% for the global economy. So BRICS countries are growing at a faster rate than the other parts of the economy. And so while we're not getting this massive switch to an alternative currency, we're getting this slow movement to being able to transact without the dollar, which is why more and more central banks, there is a declining trend in terms of central banks using dollars as their reserves, and they're using gold as their reserves. Now, the Bank for International Settlement is releasing guidance in terms of whether central banks can use Bitcoin as their reserves. And it will be interesting to watch. Now, what's happening in the US at the moment? Now, as US is going into this debt bomb at the moment, it's basically rolling over more and more of its debt into short-term bonds, which is what we're seeing. And we'll cover more of that in the macro section. But let's remember, who actually came up with the idea of BRICS in the first place and the acronym? Well, it was actually pushed by Goldman Sachs. And Goldman Sachs is an important part of the proof of weapons network. The proof of weapons network, the financial industrial complex that pushes money up to the asset managers, is investing in this multipolar world, which is why, as I've always said, tariff policy and the installation of Trump was a proof of weapons network operation, because the cost of lending to the US government, the amount of yield that the US government needs to pay to borrow for 10 years or 30 years is still increasing and increasing. And now 97% of all of the stable coins are backed by dollars. So it's only 3%. So dollar absolutely dominates the stablecoin market. And those stablecoins in dollars are backed by short-term treasury bills. And so Tether right now holds more treasuries than South Korea, the nation state of South Korea, which is an ally of, and has a currency pegged to the dollar. And so stable coins, as we've always been covering, is the future of what the dollar wants to do in order to maintain dollar dominance, which is what's creating the wealth inequality, whether you get the dollar strengthening, but we're getting this dollar weakening at the moment, which reset the order into this BRICS type of policy. Now, temporarily, the dollar's actually gone up this week as a result of announcing the trade deals. We'll go through the trade deals in the macro section. But let's look exactly at BRICS countries for crypto and Bitcoin so far. This is when you have to go outside. So China, anyway. Where is China right now? China is systemically reducing their treasury holding position. It's been going down and going down in order to protect itself from the dollar. China has been accumulating the largest oil reserve in history to the point where it competes with OPEC. And it has been increasing its gold reserves as it sells down its US treasuries. Now, there's not been much announcement on the Bitcoin side, but even though there was meant to be a Bitcoin mining ban, still we're seeing increasingly more and more mining operations that are coming out of China, and it is still creating 90% of the ASICs. And so China is still a player, which is important to keep that apolitical, geopolitical neutrality by having Bitcoin mining in very countries that don't like each other. They're also trading using Bitcoin, stablecoins, and crypto with Russia and Iran for oil deals with each other. And so when they're trading, they're either using their local currency or they're settling in Bitcoin and stablecoins as well. And that is happening between, both Iran, China, and Russia. Saudi has started accepting yuan for its oil sales to China. So now, what used to be 100% of the petrodollar settling in dollars, now 30% settles in the Chinese yuan. And you can bet your bottom dollar that will eventually go to a CBDC or even a stable coin, and you can have these settlements between in the neutral currency. So all of this is worth watching as we move, But as I said, China, at the moment, there's a Bitcoin exchange ban and a Bitcoin mining ban, even though they still operate and there's still mining happening. What about India? Well, India is involved in conflict with both China and America at the moment, but America is threatening these ginormous tariffs on India and saying that there will be a 100% tariff for thinking about any alternative to the dollar. In practicality, it doesn't matter. We'll go through more in the macro section on India and how it ignores everything because it doesn't have to. But this is what we're seeing on the India side. And now they're embracing the market. We're seeing more and more volume with Bitcoin, which is, a nation that saves in gold in general. But as the younger people come up, they're saving in Bitcoin as you get these shifts as well. So BRICS central banks, they bought more gold in 2024 than any other year on record. So they're going deeper and deeper into gold while settling more trades in crypto, stablecoins, and Bitcoin. Russia went from a hostile ban of Bitcoin back in the day that wasn't really a ban to completely embracing it for international settlements, even launching Bitcoin-backed bonds as well, using Bitcoin-structured products as well. And then launching all of these different products on Bitcoin as well. And obviously, when UAE joined BRICS alongside Egypt, and Saudi was invited but didn't fully join, but is a guest that attends the meetings, And then you had Egypt, Iran, and Ethiopia. UAE has obviously become a massive crypto hub. They just needed to solve the banking issue, and we said that now the first banks are starting to get involved, and they have a dollar peg. So you're starting to see that the Middle East, as I've been predicting geopolitically, is going to be sat in the middle between these BRICS, the US, which will be these stable coins, and these euros of central bank digital currencies. And they're all going to clear through tax neutral jurisdictions within the Middle East, is my forecast. Which is why I think energy is being used not only to build artificial intelligence data centers, but significant amounts of it is being used to build Bitcoin and Bitcoin data centers and infrastructure as well. And so, same happening with Iran. They've been mining a lot of Bitcoin, and we don't know the full stats on that. But there is no current unified stance within BRICS on any type of Bitcoin, stablecoin, or crypto policy, which is something that could come along as we enter into the next phase as well. All of the countries in BRICS still work with the US, and so they still accept the dollar. So as the dollar moves more towards stable coins, they're going to start, looking at these different types of hedging alternative, and we're going to enter into a ginormous currency war. And I think Bitcoin's going to be the neutral asset that sits in the middle as this whole strategy evolves. We know that the strategy of divide and conquer and try and push stablecoin adoption will be one of the tools for the US proof of work weapons network in order to vassalize, and I'll cover more of this in the macro section. And we know that there's going to be these different payment systems that are being built by these different corridors, like BRICS, like the ASEAN countries, like the Gulf Cooperation Council. And together, they can essentially decolonize from the proof of weapons network by using a Bitcoin as a national strategic reserve and tool. So remember, BRICS was created by Goldman Sachs. America is now moving to the stablecoin standard. As all of the different companies move to tokenization, it's going to be easier to get out of the broker, out of the exchange, out of the bank, and you're going to be able to settle these in tax neutral jurisdiction as we move to this globalist kind of Orwellian type of programmable money, and Bitcoin's going to be the resistance against that as well. The GCCs working and negotiating with BlackRock, as I cover in the geopolitical section, I'll continue to cover. And the proof of weapons network is invested in this multipolar world order. So I see this as something that is happening slowly. And you've got more time to accumulate Bitcoin. So continue accumulating every month, own more Bitcoin this month than the previous month, and make sure you do that for a minimum of 4 years. Once you look and review at the end of 4 years, you'll look back at all those different assets and realize you beat the shit out of the Fed. So Bitcoin is the exit, and it is the hedge against all of these uncertainties. You can be a geek like me. You can follow Bitcoin Hard Talk, or you can just do the simple stuff. And every single sanction that happens from a centralized player, every single freezer of assets from any type of account, every single monetary debasement, central bank digital currency launch, it creates more demand for Bitcoin because none of that competes with Bitcoin. That competes with banks. Stablecoins, central bank digital currencies, and banks are all competing with each other. And Bitcoin is the strategic reserve for those that want to opt out. Even for the countries that want to build their sovereign reserves. Even the companies that want to build their treasury reserves, as well as your ability to remain sovereign and hold it in self-custody. Because BlackRock wants your Bitcoin and they want you to hold it with them, and they are building the complex to do the Celsius pump and dump. But I think Cantor Fitzgerald is the one that's going to be executing that. They want to tokenize everything. It's all moving in that direction. And they want you to borrow against your Bitcoin so they can do the same as Celsius, and you end up in a lawsuit as well. Remember, US stablecoins plus BRICS equals Bitcoin adoption. And that is the reason to own Bitcoin, not that it crowds out Bitcoin, is the very reason to own Bitcoin. And so before we move into the macro section, as promised, the last part of part one, This Week in Bitcoin, because this was an extended section, I just want to cover a quick AI summary. Azad's going to play it for you shortly, that goes through a blog post where I've published the video, a TLDR summary, all of the different, if you prefer reading, you can read it. But it goes through the George Gammon interview where I went through the plan for BlackRock and Palantir, and which I'll be playing. Sorry, that's going to be in the next section when I cover the surveillance state. What I'm going to be covering now is the debate that I had, another blog post, where I was basically involved in a big debate around. Zod, if you could play the AI summary of the debate blog, and then we'll move into part two.
Welcome to our deep dive. Today we're looking into, well, a really intense online debate. It started in finance, but quickly spiraled into geopolitics, trust, power, the works.
Yeah, it's centered around Simon Dixon, the Bitcoin and alternative finance pioneer. We're digging into his take on an X space he was in.
Right, an X space that's like a live chat on X used to be Twitter. And Dixon wrote about it, connecting financial systems, real-world stuff, and why he thinks Bitcoin is fundamentally about peaceful resistance.
So our goal here is to unpack that, see how following the money, as he puts it, can reveal some surprising things, and why sometimes the personal gets, well, very geopolitical.
Okay, so let's set the scene. This X space, Dixon says it pretty quickly moved away from its original topic.
Right, apparently it started somewhere else entirely, but landed on this fundamental clash about trust.
Yeah, you had lawyers like Joe Carlson and Zach Shapiro arguing that, look, the world's complex. You kind of have to trust subject matter experts. Doing your own research doesn't always cut it.
Which is a fair point in many ways. But it raises that big question for you listening. Who do you trust when there's just so much information, so many narratives?
And Dixon came in with a completely different angle, didn't he? Based on his, 25 years looking at money and power.
Exactly. His counter was simple: follow the money. He basically suggests powerful people often have their stances dictated by who's funding them, that they might be compromised.
He even called it out directly in the space, asking Tanalists about their clients.
He did. And he framed it not as like a personal attack, but as crucial context. Conflicts of interest, right? It ties straight into that core Bitcoin idea. Don't trust, verify.
So a real clash of philosophies on how to even find truth.
Absolutely. One side saying trust the experts, the other saying verify the incentives.
Then things apparently got tense. Dixon talks about hitting a red line.
Yeah, he says it happened when he brought up what he described as the ongoing U.S.-funded genocide in Gaza. He refused to let it be brushed aside.
And the reaction was pushback, telling him it's anti-American propaganda or just talk Bitcoin.
That's what he recounts. And he points to this as a tactic using labels like conspiracy theorist or, anti-Semitic to shut down difficult topics.
He mentioned a specific exchange with Zach Shapiro.
Right. Dixon says Shapiro stated he didn't see it as genocide and saw Hamas as the bad guy. For Dixon, this interaction was revealing. He connects it to what he calls the proof of weapons network.
Proof of weapons network, meaning?
He essentially argues it's a system, a network that profits from conflict, from war and destruction. And he saw that disagreement as exposing that network's influence, in his view.
So, okay, how does he tie that explosive idea back to Bitcoin? Why is it relevant?
Because for Dixon, separating Bitcoin from geopolitics is just wrong. He argues Bitcoin was made for this exact situation. It's resistant.
Resistance against what specifically?
Against the financial institutions, the systems, that he believes fund these wars. He talks about being at the very first Bitcoin conference. And the feeling was us versus the banks. Bitcoin was designed, he says, as an exit.
An opt-out.
Yeah, an opt-out from what he calls a corrupt banking system that props up the U.S. dollar with war, death, destruction, and violence. Strong words.
So for him, Bitcoin isn't just like digital gold or an investment. It's a practical tool.
A tool for peaceful protest. That's key. Boycott the Fed by saving outside their system. Boycott BlackRock using self-custody, not EPFs. Boycott banks by not borrowing against Bitcoin. Even boycotting the war machine through conscious spending.
It's a freedom technology then. More about principle than price swings.
That's his core message. It's a way to fight back, peacefully, using finance itself.
Now, there was something that happened after this X-Base finished, wasn't there? A kind of postscript?
Right. Dixon mentioned that during the debate, his opponents argued nobody could really know the ground truth in Gaza.
Yeah.
Well, shortly after, a video came out from Tucker Carlson. It featured a whistleblower, retired U.S. Green Beret El-Teen Cole, Tony Aguilar.
Okay.
Aguilar was apparently part of something called the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, or GHF, and was on the ground. He reportedly confirmed witnessing horrific war crimes.
Wow. And Dixon saw this as
validation. He highlighted it as evidence supporting his own earlier statements, where he'd characterized the GHF as a U.S.-funded operation perpetrating a Holocaust. He points out this info came out after the debate.
So looking at this whole episode through Simon Dixon's lens, it really paints a picture of money, power, and global events being, well, deeply connected.
Definitely. It pushes you to think about personal responsibility when faced with these huge, complex geopolitical situations, and whether something like Bitcoin can actually function as that peaceful resistance he talks about.
It leaves you with some big questions, doesn't it? In this world flooded with information, with influence, how do you decide who or what to trust?
And what part do your own financial choices play? Is that Bitcoin mantra, don't trust, verify, just a technical thing for crypto geeks? Or is it maybe, just maybe, a broader guide for navigating, well, everything, something to think about?
Okay, welcome back, everybody. So, if you want to go check out that blog, so on my blog, simondixon.com, you can head over to the blog section, and it's called The Real Bitcoin Debate. You can't separate geopolitics from your money. What I'm noticing is that geopolitics and Bitcoin and macro seem to be merging more and more and more as these stable coins and Bitcoin come out as a real player. So you can check out that blog and get the TLDR, and you can see how we hang around on X Spaces as the community seems to be forking off in different directions. Okay, so that's everything I've got for you this week in Bitcoin. We covered basically what did we cover? I can't even remember. That's how much we covered. We're now going to move over to part two. And in part two, we're going to be covering this week in macro. We're going to pivot over to how Bitcoin can be used as a mechanism for escaping the EU and UK surveillance state. And I'm going to be going through all the trade deals that happened this week and how to interpret them. So we've still got a lot to cover. And in part three, we're going to be going through everything that happened this week in geopolitics as well, along the lines of the surveillance state theme. Okay, so I'm going to take a little bit of water and then we're going to jump straight into part two. Okay, welcome back to Bitcoin Hard Talk episode 92, part two, this week in macro. And today we're going to be covering the trade deals and everything that was announced this week. And then we're going to be going through an example of how economies are vassalized by the proof of weapons network and what the macroeconomic result is. And then we're going to give a few case studies, and we're going to go specifically deep into the crazy things that are currently happening in the UK. And I genuinely believe that UK is a beta test of a Western country to see how far they can push the surveillance as they integrate it around all the other regions. So let's jump straight in with this week in macro. Right, there was a lot of controversy today because the non-farm payroll numbers, which are essentially the job numbers in the US market, they were significantly worse than expected, and they had to do a massive correction because, oops, they reported a bunch of unemployment numbers, and they over-reported them. And so once they over-report them, they make statements and make decisions based upon them. And then there was this week, rates were held. They didn't move. They didn't push down rates despite all the drama. Last week, we covered the humiliation ritual with Trump with Jerome Powell. And I said he won't cut rates. It ain't happening. And they didn't cut rates. But as a result of these job numbers, it's increased the likelihood of having a rate cut in September. And so the market reacted to this. And because today is August the 1st, and this was the deadline for doing a trade deal with America, and we'll go through the different trade deals and the implications, we had this coincide with these corrections in terms of the data on unemployment just not matching up. And so people were making decisions about markets based upon good job data, and now they revive them. And it seems like we never consistently get accurate job data for either June or July. And you know my thoughts. We're transitioning to a world of artificial intelligence where your job today will not look like your job in the future. And now we can't rely upon the job data which people are making financial decisions. So there was a correction in all of the major stock markets today as a result of that. So unemployment isn't too bad. It's nothing to be majorly concerned about, but we're being reported data that is significantly different to what it actually ends up being. And so, the market reacted to that. But the stock market, even though you get these, indicators of what the stock market's doing, we really need to appreciate that the market indexes of the S&P is really just an S&P 7 rather than an S&P 500, because tech companies are just eating more and more and more of the stock market. The market really only cares about technology at the moment and anything that supports the infrastructure of technology as we transition to this world of Bitcoin, AI, and central bank digital currencies. Most other stocks are in a bear market. And in fact, all stocks, with the exception of a few tech stocks, are in a bear market when you price it in either Bitcoin or gold. And so while you might see an index that says the market is reaching new all-time highs, it doesn't tell you the complete story, because the technology companies are reaching new all-time highs and the other companies are struggling. And the dollar weakening is not giving you the full picture. So it's complete optical illusion. And because everything is in a bear market when priced in Bitcoin and gold at the moment. And it's only a few tech companies. Now, why is that? It's because, as I said, tariff policies was a mechanism for consolidating wealth and creating mass bankruptcies from smaller companies and consolidating wealth upwards to that. And the tech companies, which used to be just tech companies, the tech companies are now eating more and more market share of the military industrial complex companies, because it's now all technology, artificial intelligence, and cybersecurity. And with the creation of stablecoins, as we covered in part 1, this week in Bitcoin, now financial companies are also becoming technology companies. So technology is also becoming pharmaceutical as well. And so all of these industries are being gobbled up into an ever larger and larger and larger technology sector. So tariffs really hyper accelerated that consolidation. Now, tariffs initially was complete uncertainty. And so we were given this deadline. It was initially going to be happening on the 1st of April or 2nd of April, Liberation Day. Then it was going to be on pause for 90 days. Then there was a 30-day extension. And that brings us to August the 1st. And now the rates that were announced on August the 1st are going to come into effect on August the 9th. Now companies really need to decide what they're actually going to do. So if companies were eating up the tariffs because they thought they could take it in their margin, now they're going to have to put their prices up and decide exactly what they're going to do. But at the same time, there's still not complete certainty. So what does uncertainty do? Uncertainty supports the company with the biggest balance sheet and treasury, which is the large tech companies and the large corporations. And because they're global corporations, they get to use the full power of their international and global markets in order to negotiate better deals, which the small local corporations, and I said, this has always been the tariff policy, has been theft from Main Street over to Wall Street, consolidation in both the export dependent countries, America, and it drives all of those countries closer to BRICS to reset the order into this multipolar world order. That's what I was warning people from day one. It also means that you will get a return to inflation once all of the companies have had time to adjust. And we haven't seen that data yet, but we started to see inflation is worse at the moment. So we had an announcement that China and US have decided to do another pause and another extension for another 90 days. So obviously, I've always believed that tariff policy was created because China already won the trade war. And this was BlackRock's strategy to reset the world order. And Trump was implementing that. But we're getting this forever extension around that relationship and how it impacts all the big companies. Now, traders, US's biggest trading partner is in fact Canada and Mexico. So Mexico had the same extension just like China. But Canada, it got more aggressive. So they announced that it's going to be 35%. And interestingly, they tied it to the Palestinian cause. So because Canada said that they're going to be recognizing Palestine, we'll cover more about that in part 3 in geopolitics. Trump said that he's going to be using tariffs to stop that from happening. Just think about that for a second. Trade policy is being used to prevent Palestine being an independent state by the Trump administration. That's a wild concept, given that Canada is their most important trading partner. Now, remember, Canada already has the tariffs on and aluminum, if you're American, aluminium, if you're British. And the estimates from Canada is that this will cost Canada about 100,000 job losses just based upon those types of industries. But Canada's not rolling over. It's having the desired impact, which is it's doing deals closer to EU BRICS and other types of corridors. But there are industries where America and Canada, they're neighbors. They're always going to have to work together on it. But what we noticed is that Canada announced that it's actually going to start construction and move forward with its largest LNG natural gas export facility. What does that export facility do? It offers direct Pacific Ocean access, making it a lot easier to route LNG from Canada and over to Asian nations as well, and Asian markets. And it will be cheaper to do that compared to the US. And so the desired impact is to open up all of these markets, put US into a regional power. They get some tariff revenue, but it resets the world order as eventually that can lead to a weakening of the dollar. America can have cheaper exports and everything can get reset. But then Trump's fiscal policy is having the opposite effect of destabilizing the dollar. But if you get stablecoin adoption that we talked about in part 1, that's a strengthening of the dollar. So these are very complex things. But the one thing is that the reset has happened. So Trump said that he's reached a deal this week with the European Union. And there was a visit in Scotland between Trump and the leader of the European Union. And it was announced that the deal includes 4 parts. The first was an agreement to open up trade at 10% tariff. Immediately, after Trump saying this deal was done, the European Union denied that it hadn't actually been agreed and it wasn't ready to announce. The second part was the European Union is going to be buying up $750 billion of US energy. Now, there is not actually enough supply, and the drill baby drill policy is not working to increase that supply. And America's supplies are too expensive compared to Russia. And so there is actually not enough supply for that $750 billion to even be anything realistic as a number. So the European Union came out and said, well, we haven't agreed to that. The third was the European Union agreed to purchase vast amounts of US autos. So buy more cars from America. The European Union came out and said, well, nothing's confirmed with that. The fourth part of the deal was that tariffs on automobiles are going to be reduced to 15%. Trump calls this the biggest deal ever reached, a massive win, and none of it has been reached. So none of the deals actually been done, but apparently this is the biggest deal that's ever been done. So the oil that Trump says Europe's going to be buying, it just doesn't even exist. It can't be fulfilled. That number's just not there. The US, it needs to export its natural gas, which is what all this is about, but it's now charging a tariff to do that. So how does that make sense as well? So, these deals, they're very ambiguous. They're very questionable about whether these things are done. The European Union has lots of climate change goals. So as part of that climate change goal, which you have to get voting from all the different members of European Union as well in order to get that, it says that it can't purchase from the US until the US has met climate change goals. And so in the end, it means that you could just simply back out of the deal because it says you didn't meet this goal in terms of climate change. All this to say is that it is a memorandum of understanding, which is really easy to request the US to meet its energy requirements and then pull the deal. And so this is all theatrics, as usual. And remember, the EU is absolutely doomed if it gets dependent upon the US, because the whole operation of the proof of weapons network, vassalizing EU, was about making sure that Germany, the large manufacturing base, was dependent upon Russia gas and with Nord Stream pipeline, then taking away the pipeline, accelerating the war through NATO expansion, and then completely vassalizing Ukraine and destroying the European economy so that it had a dependency upon expensive American LNG. But the deal's said that it's signed, but there's nothing confirmed there from the European Union side. Also in the deal, it requested that the European Union buy no gas from Russia. There is no replacement from Russian natural gas. They've implemented sanction after sanction after sanction, and they're still dependent upon it. The CIA needed to blow up Nord Stream pipeline, but they're still getting through these different routes. And so France, Spain, Belgium, they all import it via Netherlands, and Netherlands also gets some of these oil exports from India. And so all of this is connected, and all it does is it creates additional markets that strategically make it way more expensive for Europe, even though it's actually coming from the same place in the first place. And all of that is vassalization for the proof of weapons network by turning India into the fastest growing economy. And then you escalate tensions between Pakistan and India so that you can do some of those operations to try and vassalize further and further and further before you switch to this multipolar world order as well. All of this to say is, if this deal is signed, it is the complete destruction of the European Union that will potentially lead to a breakup, and a breakup will be economic destruction that allows BlackRock to buy European Union assets at pennies on the dollar and vassalize it further. And remember, all of these deals, anything you do with European Union, is an absolute bureaucracy. It requires all of the European Union members to actually sign the deal for it to actually be implemented. And Italy and France have already argued against it. And this requires unanimous signing. So, you know, you've got a Canada deal that has a disagreement over Palestine. You've got a Mexico deal that has been extended. You've got a China deal that has been extended. And you've got an announcement of a European Union deal that hasn't happened and is impractical as well. So Trump also came out and said that he's going to be imposing a 25% tariff on India. So now let's look at India. The announcement was, quote, India is my friend, but charge more tariffs than any other country. So the Indian tariff, as of the 1st of August, and I think it gets implemented on the 9th of August, is set at 25% as it currently stands. Now, remember the relationship between Russia, India, and European Union to create this expensive mechanism for exporting gas. The European Union has imposed 18 different rounds of sanctions on Russia. The last one was a price cap, and a price cap on Russian oil just helps China and India to become a larger economy. 30% of Russian refinery actually happens in India. And so what happened is that Russia started building its refining factories in India. And because there was a CEO that was from the European Union, and because he was a European Union resident, India had to fire that CEO, but they made it out like sanctions are working. And sanctions absolutely are not working because of the different BRICS corridors that have been set up. So India never, ever follows any of the European Union, UK, Swiss sanctions. It just circumvents them because of its strength of its partnership with the BRICS countries. So even though you could be enemies on your border with China, the practicality of these relationships through trade are making the BRICS corridor work, and it's making sanctions no longer work. And that is why we're getting this multipolar world order that we're seeing right now. So India circumvents sanctions every single day. It carries on making those. In fact, India imports 2.1 million barrels of oil from Russia every single day, which is why it's one of the fastest growing economies, because it gets to take that clip and it's destroying Europe, even though the oil is actually coming from the same place. So this is how you know it's a whole, theater based upon these operations as well. And it can only come from Russia. There's no alternative. So you might as well work with Russia, but instead this operation's carried out in order to get it from US, which is why Europe is being vassalized into the US. And who is the US? The US is vassalized into the Proof of Weapons Network, which has BlackRock as the CEO. If you've watched any of my blogs and content, you can go over to a blog where you can see what is the Proof of Weapons Network and go a little bit further. So if US replaces, this would basically lead to a massive increase in the price of oil, which is the opposite of what Trump wants. So this would push oil above $100, and that would have massive global inflation. And so that would require intervention. What intervention could it be? Well, China's built up their massive oil reserves. It would be OPEC plus, and it would be Russia. So you'd be begging Russia to do that. Otherwise, you'd end up with the problems that we had during the Russia-Ukraine invasion in the first place. So it's all talk. This is what it is to say. Nobody can stop basically Russia, Iran, and China and these exports of oil. And no matter what you put these tariffs are, it's just going to create another problem for Europe, which is vassalization, which I think is the goal. We also had a 20% tariffs on Taiwan. Obviously, the most important in Taiwan is the semiconductor chips. But what has happened? They've been exempt for the most important commodities. And Trump signed off on exports of those chips to China. Switzerland's going to get 39%, Vietnam 29%. Now Vietnam is doing a lot more deals with China. China's investing in Vietnam. And this is a mechanism for deciding, what happens. So you vassalize the export-dependent countries. They get acquired and consolidate them into the large corporations. And they have a mechanism for playing the global game and doing deals with both China, US. And then they get the different types of important tariffs exempted. So then it becomes a two-tiered game where the normal businesses that don't have the leverage, they pay the tariff. So the companies in America, Main Street, the Main Street corporation that creates all jobs, most of the jobs, they end up paying they end up getting a tax, and they increase their prices. So we've got inflation to come as a result of that. Everyone else, Trump said, is now on reciprocal tariffs. There was a bit of confusion whether this involves Vietnam, Switzerland, South Africa, Taiwan, Cambodia, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, Turkey, Venezuela. But all of those are looking at building their routes outside of the American bloc. So absolutely is why we're getting this massive increase in trade. And I think those that are in reciprocal tariffs is estimated to be a minimum of 15%. All this to say is none of the data factors in, how companies are actually going to react and the impact on prices. But now I think it is time for companies to absolutely address it. They can't just roll it over and eat it up. They're going to have to decide what they're going to be doing with prices and how they're going to react. And so this is still going to be pushing prices up, but we haven't got any of the data. This is going to be rolled out for like maybe 6 months, a year from now, until we really see the inflationary impact. But we've already had an increase and turnaround in inflation. So that's all the different types of trade deals that we've had so far. All this to say, destabilization campaign and the impact of tariffs, I think, has been what we've been covering on Bitcoin Hard Talk throughout. Okay. Obviously, Trump, knowing what comes next, has been engaging in that battle with Jerome Powell. And so, it's always going to be, you didn't put down rates, that's why this happened. And that's the type of, that's kind of the US plan, I guess, a blame shifting plan from what happens next. But also, there was an announcement that over the next 3 months, the US, yes, the same US that said it's going to be taking care of its national debt, is going to be reducing its deficit. It said that over the next 3 months is going to be issuing $1 trillion of debt over the next 3 months. If you annualize that, that's $4 trillion this year. Now, I'm not saying it's going to happen all of this year, but $4 trillion is almost all of the $5 trillion debt ceiling, which was meant to be over the next 10 years. And so $4 trillion, either we're getting over the next 3 months a massive amount, and then it will ratchet down. But they said that half of that debt is going to go into the Treasury General Account. And so the Treasury General Account is essentially the account that the Treasury has with the Federal Reserve in order to cover all the costs. And the job increases have all been happening at the government level. And so they're refilling the bank account of the Treasury to cover all of the costs of running the government, which are increasing at a rapid rate. So all that does is it puts upward pressure on the dollar and the rates. And so we saw the DXY, for all of its weakening, based upon this announcement and the tariff announcement, the DXY has gone above the $100 mark again. I think long term is still going to be weakened as a result, but we got this big spike as a result of these announcements. So the losses below the $97 is above $100 again. So we'll keep watching that as well. the growth was announced as very, very good. But remember, that was from the tariffs. So you had these key dates where essentially the headline GDP number, it said that it was 3%, which was above expectations. And so we had the bad number, if you remember, like 3 months ago. But now we have the good number because that's a result of the front running of tariffs. So it's like you had a boom bust type of mini cycle based upon tariffs and all the front running, which kind of adds a lot of noise. But Trump will take the victory and say, see, we got the best economy. We got 3% growth. We're growing like never before. But essentially, when you strip away the bits in the middle, it's neutral. It's neither good figures or catastrophic. It's essentially neutral, and now we need to see the real figures. But then we're getting further delays based upon rolling out these different tariff policies. Inflation went up a little bit. We had the CPI numbers and the PPI numbers. That was slightly above expectations. Jobs are good, but essentially weaker than expected. And we had the revision of numbers, which made the correction in the market today. All this to say, there's absolutely no reason to reduce rates for any of the traditional reasons that Trump is saying we need to fire Powell because he's not reducing rates. The data's not saying you need to reduce rates because that would be inflationary, and inflation is still not resolved. The only reason to reduce rates is if you wanted to sell short-term fiscal distress, fiscal dominance, in order to sell that $1 trillion of debt to fill up the Treasury general account so that you can meet your payment obligations, because you are a distressed debt at the moment. And it's looking closer and closer to that. And so that would be the only reason to actually reduce rates, just to roll over at a shorter rate for fiscal dominance, which is, a real bad sign for what's happening, even though you're getting the illusion of stock markets reaching new all-time in dollar terms as well. Apple announced that it's exempt from the 25% tariff on India. So there's an example. As I said, you get the large companies that would get the exemptions because they don't want the price of iPhones to go up, and they want them to build their factories in India rather than China. So you just get these exemptions. And so large companies will get these carve-outs, and Apple's just a crystal clear example of that as well. It was also announced that in this fiscal dominance, that they're exploring just paying $600 tariff rebate to every single American. You can bet your bottom dollar if that happens, it will probably happen via some kind of stable coin adoption strategy. But what is the point of a tariff when it's just going to be used to create inflation, because you rebate the American people, which pushes the prices up further, as happened with helicopter money during COVID, when essentially you just had an inflationary stimulus. Makes people feel good, but it's essentially it's a nice act in order to buy votes, make it look like something's happening, but it does not decrease the deficit at all. It is not good for people, but it's great for buying votes. So it could be around, stablecoin adoption. It could be around, some of the policies that need to be implemented around the midterm election. But essentially what the market is saying at this stage is that the market just doesn't care. As long as Trump, you keep the debt-based Ponzi scheme going, you create wealth inequality, you give a subsidy to the rich, you do more crony capitalism, you do the big, beautiful bill, the market just doesn't give a shit what anyone says anymore. So the whole volatility around trade policy, the market just doesn't react as it used to. There was a threat, which again, the market didn't react to much, which is that the US threatened to impose a 100% tariff on China if they continue to buy Russian oil. Oil prices basically went up over $70 per barrel as Trump made, to threaten that economic sanction on Russia. China basically rejected it and said the US demands to stop buying Russian oil ain't going to happen. And so the overall thesis is that BlackRock is vassalizing and transitioning the world to BRICS, and none of the sanctions are working. And I think the trade war is just a mechanism for making countries build all of those corridors and build those new relationships. And who's going to be buying all of these distressed companies? Of course, it's the private equity industry of BlackRock's proof of weapons network. And all of the large corporations that are going to be buying the distressed companies as well. So this is extreme vassalization, is the macro policy. Consolidation as the stock market becomes fewer and fewer companies, while many of the companies are in distress, but everything transitions to this technocracy. And that is clearly the strategy that is being implemented. And I think is being implemented for the profits of the proof of weapons network. So I just wanted to give a little bit, I use this word vassalization. Basically, the whole purpose of vassalization is to take a state and utilize it in order to extract more value out of it, whereby the state is no longer what works for the people, it's just good for what works for the recipient of vassalization. And because this proof of weapons network government is subordinate to it, you can strategically weaken states in order to make sure that you get more control and more vassalization. It's like a loop that happens. So at the moment, the US, the EU, the UK, Israel, Canada, Australia, and the US itself is going through this extreme vassalization for the proof of weapons network. So it can increase its assets under administration. There's about $11 trillion with BlackRock. Then you got Vanguard, which is a private, and then you got State Street. And you can, these funds are able to grow and grow and grow, and then they can globally diversify all around the world. But let's give a few examples. I wanted to give an example. One is France, Germany, and UK. Let's have a look at how the vassalization is working, and then how it leads to these policies that are supporting the surveillance companies in the proof of weapons network. So France under Macron, let's have a look at some of the things. Basically, he has significantly increased the proof of weapons network penetration across France. It's driven by increasing the amount of debt, which helps the financial industrial complex. They receive the yield on the debt by purchasing that debt. It then basically implements reforms, and those reforms involve deregulation and support of those larger companies. You have basically weaker protections for various sectors so that they're easier to vassalize, and then you get that implemented in the policy. But if you look at the key sectors, like for France, energy and aerospace, France has basically given up complete ownership stakes to the proof of weapons network as a result of this strategic weakening. As high as about 20 to 30% of the private sector, of the public sector, has been handed over to the proof of weapons network through these types of policies. So this is how you basically manufacturing, the ability to have more vassalization for the private sector and the public companies. This now represents, the manufacturing base is about 12% of the GDP of France. And this includes the proof of weapons, heavy networks, like companies that own more and more of the companies through the proof of weapons network, like Airbus and Safran. And foreign ownership in France is now about 20 to 25% of all of these companies. So when France basically, does a $40 billion deal with China, which is what was announced, is basically indirectly benefiting the proof of weapons network, because you get to print the $40 billion, you vassalize some of those companies, and then when China does a deal, China's doing a deal because the proof of weapons network is now the shareholder in that structure. And the worse the economy gets, the more you can buy it in distress, and then you can change policy. It's kind of like, imagine you own 50% of a company because you sold 50% of your business to some kind of distribution channel, or, signs a deal, and you're only a 50% shareholder. And then you do a distribution deal, which is worth like millions of dollars of revenue. Those proceeds are for the benefit of the shareholders. But now the proof of weapons network has managed to get 50% of that company. So it owns 50% of the revenue. The European Central Bank can print the money. The money can go through crony capitalism. You sign these partnerships with China. And now the strength of the relationship between China and a node of the European Union that BlackRock benefits from through the proof of weapons network strengthens before you reset the world orders and you have these radically changing policies. So the deeper you can get a country into debt, it can easily at any stage just do a capital call, which means that you need to refinance the debt, which means that you need to pay with the assets, which is the classic private equity model that is done on a proof of weapons network sovereign basis. If you compare this to a country like Germany, and then we'll do the UK as well, they have actually built up quite a lot of immunity, which is why they had their own manufacturing base. But the proof of weapons network is able to use another tool, which is blackmail operations, political interference, and selection of a leader, and then you can corrupt that leader into changing the policies that no longer work for the German people but do work for the proof of weapons network. So if you look at Germany, their manufacturing base is basically dominated by, sorry for my German, Mittelstand, and giants like Siemens and Volkswagen. And the foreign ownership is really limited to about 10 to 15% compared to France. And so you have less control with a 10 to 15% shareholding relative to a majority shareholding as well. And so in Germany, there's really strict screening of foreign trade, a bit like they do in China, and a bit like Putin did for Russia, which is why he became public enemy number one, because he was expelling those that were trying to vassalize Russia after the fall of the Soviet Union. And they have Payment Act blocks to basically control the proof of weapons network involvement in the automotive industry and the machinery industry. And they limit foreign direct investment. So what's happening in America right now is Trump is negotiating foreign direct investment, which is essentially the proof of weapons network. Or if there is a sovereign wealth fund, they get control and power through these economic negotiations that come with terms. And that's what we're seeing essentially in a lot of the diplomacy that I'll cover in part 3 as well. But foreign direct investment from the proof of weapons network in manufacturing means that you significantly dilute some of those holding companies, but then you can structure it, for example, where you take a company, and what Germany does is they set up a specific company just for a joint venture. And so you only give control over the joint venture company, and you funnel money through via these NGOs and various other things, but you never give up control of the parent company. And that's what Germany has done, which is why it's so much harder to vassalize Germany. And so instead of you giving up 50% of your actual company, which is what France, UK, and extreme vassalized countries, which have extreme debt in them, you instead just do it via a joint venture company, which is a different level of control and your mechanism for controlling the proof of weapons network. So when Germany strikes a deal with China, or when it does something with BRICS in the billions of dollars, it doesn't necessarily benefit the proof of weapons network, because it only benefits via these joint venture companies rather than being the shareholder, which is why Germany is in a very, very different situation, because European Union was created to be big Germany, which was created by the Bank for International Settlements, which is what funded Nazi Germany and the European Union reconstruction project when America funded it in order to vassalize Europe further. And then America got vassalized into the private corporations. And this is why we have this situation right now where this proof of weapons network has significant control over debt in America, and in other countries that are less vassalized. You can control welfare, you can control fiscal spending, and all of this just basically gives you either more power to the state or less power to the state. And this is why we have these injection of politicians that just vassalize the country further and takes the country further and further away from the people. Once you don't have control, you no longer represent the people. And this is the main mechanism by which the proof of weapon network will use. And what it wants to do is it wants to trade with BRICS as much as possible before resetting the order. And the Federal Reserve is always the mechanism to have extreme policies, which is why Jerome Powell is just a puppet for the governments, not the governments, the banks. The banks are the shareholders, and those are public companies owned by the asset managers like BlackRock on the top. So it will always seek to vassalize as much as possible. That is the strategy of the proof of weapons network. And then prior to resetting the world order, and engaging any of these operations with BRICS, which is exactly what we're seeing across the European Union right now. And this is exactly why the proof of weapons network had to install a puppet like Merz, which is the German leader at the moment. And basically, it will just bend the country into the proof of weapons network and try and take away as much of those controls as well. This is why it's really, important they use this political interference as well. And this is exactly what happened with Starmer in the UK. And so Starmer is a puppet government. He might as well work for Lockheed Martin and BlackRock. He recently had a meeting with Larry Fink. And he also sits down with other sovereign wealth funds and looks to handle the extreme debt crisis within the UK. And even you have policies to sell the country's Bitcoin. But the goal of the proof of weapons network right now is, I believe, to turn the UK into a complete surveillance state, to beta test a lot of the technology that it wants to implement around the European Union and implement within America and implement with other control structures as we transition to the importance of the technical industrial complex as well. So what did the UK do now that Starmer is in power? Well, we have suddenly all of these tax increases. And so what's the impact of the tax increases so far? Well, if you look at the UK, the 9 billionaires that were living in the UK left the UK because they don't want to be subjected to those tax. You had 10,800 millionaires that left in 2024, and it's projected to be 16,500 that will be leaving the UK this year alone. But what about tax receipts as a result of increasing the tax on the wealthy? Because they all left, the capital gains tax receipts dropped from $13.5 billion that the wealthy were paying to only $11.8 billion. And so now you've got this doom loop spiral within the UK where they're talking about introducing ever more oppressive, maybe wealth taxes. And then those wealthy people are leaving, and that is reducing the tax revenue, which is making the debt situation worse, which means it needs to borrow more from the proof of weapons network. And the rates that they have to pay in the proof of weapons network financial complex will always be willing to issue those loans because it knows it can always use the Bank of England to reprint the money, vassalize further, and it's in a complete doom loop where the government just does not work for the people at all, but you get to acquire more and more of the key assets of the UK in order to either push civil unrest, which makes those assets go down in value, and then you can purchase them on the cheap. And that's why you get these policies like fueling racial tensions. We know the media is fully controlled by the proof of weapons network. So whatever narrative you have on the media and the technology algorithms which are trying to funnel through what you actually see, these are all operations that the proof of weapons network has at its disposal in order to vassalize countries further. Once enough assets are acquired, the central bank, can basically print the money, and you can then use that in order to issue crony capitalism and large contracts. That's what's happening with all of these large contracts to say we're defending democracy, but the contracts are going back up to Lockheed Martin, the military-industrial complex, and the media is pushing a narrative that Putin is the new Hitler, while essentially Russia gets to own the whole of Ukraine. I gave all those updates last week, which is the inevitable, predictable, and you're seeing Russia gain more and more territory while Europeans pay the bill through inflation, while the US stock market goes up in value, which gives more power to the proof of weapons network. And so they get more power to vassalize as the economy gets weaker. And this is the portfolio management strategy. And Britain has just now become a beta for the police state. So what policies do we hear from the politicians? Well, this week we had the enactment of the online safety bill. And this is to try and make it more safe for people in the world of cybersecurity. So essentially, it's a Trojan horse for mass surveillance. And obviously, they're not going to tell you that it's for your, they're going to say it's for your own good. They're not going to say that we're weaponizing this against you. But what is included in this act? So now every single phone call in the UK, every single text message, and every single email can be stored under the Investigatory Powers Act in the UK. So they can completely do that. That's fine. That's completely legal now. All of your browsing history is saved for at least a year, even if you've done nothing wrong. So you don't need to commit a crime. They can save your browsing history. Google has to hand that over, and the government gets to integrate that and use that. And the government is doing data sharing contracts with guess who? Palantir, ChatGPT, the technical industrial complex of the proof of weapons network. What else? Your local, your location is consistently tracked by your mobile provider, and it's completely legal to do that. They say they got GDPR in the European Union, but in the UK, you've now got face recognition cameras, which are absolutely everywhere. And none of that is with your consent. So they can follow you based upon face recognition. But how do they get your face recognition? Well, they introduce the ability for you have to KYC and do your face recognition in order to access YouTube and various other channels. And that's being done under protecting children. They need to know that you're above 16 before they can do that. Now, smart TVs and devices are basically able to listen to you legally. Your social media posts are completely scraped. They become completely analyzed by Palantir, and they are fed into algorithms in order to control what you're actually seeing in your algorithm. Banks are now allowed to, they're basically asked that they have to flag any unusual transactions. Even if you're just buying gold or Bitcoin or crypto, they need to flag that. And they need to let the algorithm know. Apps like WhatsApp, basically, they can be forced to break their encryption for your protection, of course. So they can go and they can be forced to break the encryption. The government can demand access to your private messages without actually telling you. So they can go to WhatsApp, they can break the encryption, they have to have the backdoor, and they can take your messages, and they don't need to ask you as well. And this is exactly why they want to vassalize. So people ask, why is there mass migration? Mass migration is a tool and an operation in order to fuel racial tensions, in order to fuel, through atrocity propaganda, so that you can have rules like this, so that they say that they're doing it for your own good, but it creates the environment of all of the technology vassalization as well. And so if they need a war or a civil war or civil unrest in order to get what they need, then they're fine with that, because this is what the proof of weapons network has always done. This is what it's done in the Middle East. This is what it's done in the global South. This is what it's done in Asia. And now it's doing it on Europe as well. So I just wanted to give you that type of example so you can understand from the macro side why we have ended up in this scenario through financialization and securitization and vassalization, that the governments completely don't represent our interest. And so you are much, much better off engaging and understanding what these large corporations are up to and impacting their share price and engaging in boycott and all sorts of stuff. And so what I'm going to do right now is I created a blog post of looking into the Genius Jack and the Big Beautiful Bill, but now you understand the relationship between the Proof of Weapons Network with its hosts in the US, the European Union, the UK, and other vassalization strategies. This is why we absolutely have to follow what happens in America, because America is the test bed and the host of the Proof of Weapons Network, and it's all interconnected. So I went on George Gammon today to give some updates on what happened with the Genius Act and Big Beautiful Bill. And so while people are getting very excited about the implications on crypto, people are missing the point of why you need to hold your Bitcoin in self-custody, which isn't impacted by the Genius Act in any way, but this is actually a mechanism for handing over power to banks and ushering in the surveillance state for the Proof of Weapons Network. And so I created a blog post that summarizes it. It's called BlackRock and Palantir have a new plan, and you should be terrified. So I'm just going to play that AI summary, and then we're going to wrap up on how big the Proof of Weapons Network is becoming because of this extreme vassalization. And then that's going to do everything for part 2 this week in macro, and we'll get into the geopolitical section. So Azad, if you could play the second video with the summary from the BlackRock and Palantir plan.
All right, buckle up for this one. We're taking a deep dive into an analysis by Simon Dixon. He's a well-known figure in Bitcoin alternative finance, known for calling some big financial shifts pretty accurately.
Right, he has a track record.
And recently, he's laid out what he thinks is, well, a massive plan involving JP Morgan, Palantir, BlackRock. The goal, he claims, something like a 1984-style surveillance state. Sounds pretty alarming, I know.
Yeah, it's a strong claim. But what's interesting is how he connects things, seemingly separate stuff, like legislation and tech companies.
Okay, so what are the key pieces he uses to build this picture?
Well, he focuses on 2 main bits of legislation. Names he gives them are the Genius Act and the Big Beautiful Bill, and then specific tech players. He argues these are forming the apparatus for this control system. So our mission today is basically to break down his argument for you, see what he thinks is really going on.
Okay, so where does he start? The money side.
Yeah, stablecoins. He points out how useful they are for global payments and, crucially, how profitable. Like Tether, apparently making more profit than BlackRock or Citibank because they hold all those U.S. treasuries.
Interesting. And then the legislation comes in, this Genius Act.
Right. According to Dixon, this act gives licensed banks, specifically naming JP Morgan, a kind of monopoly. They get to issue stablecoins backed by Fed reserves. And here's the kicker. They can pay yield on them.
Which non-banks can't do.
Exactly. Forbidden for non-bank issuers, he says. So it creates this advantage.
So if the government isn't issuing a digital dollar directly, how is this a covert CBDC, as he calls it?
That's the core of his argument there. He claims that even with maybe some anti-CBDC talk or bills, this other legislation effectively creates it indirectly. Instead of the Fed doing it, they empower, or rather license, a private bank, JP Morgan in his scenario, to run it.
So a private company controls the central ledger.
That's what he's asserting, yeah. A new centralized ledger, but run privately, circumvents the whole direct government digital currency debate, perhaps. He also brings up influence from what he terms a crypto lobby, potentially funded by less regulated parts of crypto. And he mentions connections like the Trump family's World Liberty Financial potentially being positioned to benefit. Again, these are his specific claims.
Okay, so that's the financial plumbing potentially sorted, according to Dixon. What about the data side? He mentioned data consolidation.
Exactly. He argues that running parallel to this financial shift is a huge data grab. He points to the big, beautiful bill. Sold, he says, as a way to pay down national debt, maybe linked to government efficiency projects, which he connects to Elon Musk, calling them DOGE.
Okay. But Dixon says the real purpose was different.
Yeah, he claims the real purpose was consolidating all U.S. government data, IRS, healthcare, you name it, into one massive database.
Wow. And who manages this database in his theory?
This is where Palantir comes in, Peter Thiel's company. Dixon claims they got the contract. And he highlights Palantir's background. Testing tech in Middle East conflicts, building UK surveillance systems, drone integration in Ukraine, crowd control in Saudi Arabia.
So showing they have the capability for large-scale surveillance and data management.
That's the implication he draws, yes. He also loops in Elon Musk again, saying he's building parallel data infrastructure. X, Tesla, Starlink, SpaceX. So Dixon's conclusion. The PayPal mafia, Thiel, and Musk have built the infrastructure for what he calls a global social credit score system.
An Orwellian nightmare, he calls it.
Yeah, and one he says you've effectively already paid for through government contracts and initiatives.
Okay, so you have JP Morgan on finance, Palantir, and Musk on data. Who does Dixon see pulling the strings at the very top?
He puts BlackRock there, managing the whole portfolio, basically. Financial assets, data assets. He points out that both the Fed and the Treasury use BlackRock's Aladdin AI for policy decisions.
The risk management system.
Right. Plus, he states BlackRock is the biggest shareholder in Palantir, Tesla, big banks like JP Morgan. Part of this network at the very top with State Street and Vanguard.
So connecting all the pieces.
Yeah. Dixon's argument, when you boil it down, is that a system was set up, potentially under Trump, he suggests, where JP Morgan runs the covert CBDC plumbing. Palantir and Musk build and manage the data infrastructure for a global social credit score. And BlackRock's AI manages the entire thing like a single global portfolio. He and George Gammon, in their discussion he references, basically said, it's a private club and you're not invited.
Heavy stuff. So what's his takeaway? Just be scared.
No, he actually says the opposite. Don't be paralyzed by fear, be motivated by it. He argues this whole control system relies on the old legacy financial network. His solution, opt out.
Opt out how?
He suggests tools like Bitcoin, held in self-custody, offer a parallel path. A way to be outside this surveillance and control system he describes.
Interesting. It definitely leaves you thinking.
For sure. It really pushes you to question, what does opting out actually mean today? And maybe more importantly, how can tech that seems helpful or efficient, actually, maybe unintentionally, build systems that impact your freedom, your sovereignty, both financially and personally? Definitely something to mull over.
Okay, now as we close out Bitcoin Hard Talk episode 92 part 2 this week in macro, I'm just going to give you a few stats to give you the scale of the centralization and consolidation that's happened as a result of this tariff policy, big beautiful bill, and the multi-party proof of weapons network that is bipartisan. So people criticize me saying, oh, you got Trump derangement syndrome. Anyone that's a long-term listener of Bitcoin Hard Talk, I was doing the same with Biden because it's the same thing. It's the same network and the same people are selected and the politics is the distraction. Focusing on the money is way, way, way more important than what people focus their time on. So I just wanted to give you an idea of the size of the market capitalization of why stock indexes are at new all-time high, yet many companies are struggling. And this is the K-shaped economy. Just as many people are struggling, while the rich get richer and the poor get poorer because they own the assets and they're closer to the money printer, it's the same within the stocks and the different companies they're going to be gobbled up and consolidated into the proof of weapons network in distress. So NVIDIA is now a $4.1 trillion company. That's providing all the data centers infrastructure behind all of the artificial intelligence and the robotics and everything for this whole technology. According to, that's the largest asset in the world with the exception of gold. Microsoft is now almost $4 trillion. We got another $1 trillion company because of their position in ChatGPT and their software. Apple is $3.1 trillion. Think of all the money printing from the Federal Reserve that went to prop up that price and allow them to create that technology, which is a government subsidy that is now vassalized with the largest shareholder being the Proof of Weapons Network and BlackRock in all of these companies. Amazon is a $2.3 trillion company now. Google is a $2.2 trillion company. Meta, Facebook, is a $1.2 trillion company. And the Taiwanese company that creates all the chips for all of the technology, the semiconductor chips, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, is a $1.2 trillion company. Tesla is under $1 trillion now, $976 billion, but will fluctuate above there. And the surveillance company that's doing all the crimes against humanity and executing genocide as a service, Palantir, has gone up to a $358 billion company. Tech is eating all stocks in the world as we transition to a world of artificial intelligence, central bank digital currencies, and stablecoins. And Bitcoin is your resistance, which requires semiconductor chips and Bitcoin data centers geographically diversified around the world as it is today, which has created the largest distributed supercomputer. So when we need to decentralize some of that artificial intelligence, Bitcoin proof of work is the resistance against it. Central bank digital currencies, stable coins, they're just a private version and a centralized version of a similar control structure controlled by the same proof of weapons network. And they control the entire collective West, with their governments no longer working for the people and only working for the proof of weapons network, with all of the different types of operations that is required in order to make you feel like they might work for you. And the US is completely vassalized into this network as well, despite the fact that people think that the Constitution may protect them. It doesn't protect them from the tyranny of a proof of weapons network, which is a stateless entity that doesn't really care about the Constitution, that can buy out Senate, can buy out Congress, can install politicians, and can probably bribe and blackmail any judge in any power structure through the quote-unquote deep state, which is a subsidiary of the military-industrial complex, which is subordinate to the proof of weapons network, as they are all public companies as well. So that's going to do it for everything this week in macro. Hope you enjoyed that. There's a blog post from that AI summary where you can watch the full interview, and we went really a lot deeper into these different technologies. And now we're going to be covering the final section, part 3 of Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 92, on BlackRock and Gulf states' plan, and which involves building a surveillance state beta with the European Union and UK. So let's jump into the geopolitics in part 3 right now. So in part 2, we covered a lot on the vassalization. In part 1, we covered a lot on the technology. But there is competition to the proof of weapons network. And that is a country that remains sovereign. And how do you remain sovereign? Well, you don't allow a proof of weapons central bank to create a debt-based Ponzi scheme in your country and implement income tax, because in the case of US, income tax only came in when the Europeans installed the Federal Reserve. And in the case of UK, income tax only came in when the Bank of England was funded in order to fund a war between UK and France and bankrupt the government and vassalize the government into what was the control structure, the central bank at the time. But now these central banks can be subordinate to the asset managers, as we've covered. But who resists against it? Well, countries can remain sovereign. And they are always attacked through militia groups in order to create separatist movements. So you can overthrow leaders. And when you overthrow leaders, you can then try and get penetration through war. And that is the key mechanism of the proof of weapons network. And so those that remain sovereign are the ones that are not substituted to debt slavery, which is why the IMF was an organism for enslaving the world through the economic hitmen at the IMF. But if you have your own resources and you're able to build sovereign wealth, you're able to combat the proof of weapons network. And rather than having extreme vassalization, you're able to negotiate with the proof of weapons network, which is the geopolitical reality of today. Many of the countries in the Middle East, they were war-torn, they were subordinated, they were colonized, but they didn't allow central banks to take over some of the countries. Now, obviously, Lebanon and the countries that are vassal states, Jordan, Egypt, they installed a Western central bank and they took the IMF loan, or they were forced into the IMF loans through covert wars. But the countries that managed to get on the other side of that and keep their resources where they didn't need to tax people because they were able to use their gas and their oil, and they were able to partner with the colonizers, or partner with the Western powers like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE, various other countries did. They were able to keep the proof of weapons network at bay, even though sometimes it would be tempted to turn it into a forever war, destabilize, overthrow leadership. But some of them managed to remain sovereign. This is why Putin from Russia is public enemy number one, because it came up against the proof of weapons network. This is why you're told that communism and Xi Jinping, which essentially created a system of utilizing capitalism, but putting a cap on vassalization by not allowing any company to become bigger than the government, which has a different type of ideology and different model, are public enemy number one. And so what I believe you're witnessing right now as my long-term geopolitical analysis, from all the humanitarian atrocities aside, just putting on follow the money, the Middle East is basically having an impact in geopolitics because it's able to negotiate with the proof of weapons network. So you are seeing, as a result of that, the vision that I've always talked about, which I think the Middle East wants to decolonize from the proof of weapons network. But the proof of weapons network wants to get as much vassalization as it can on the companies that it's taken over. But there is a negotiation to hand over power to the GCC, which is a block of Gulf Cooperation Council countries backed by BRICS and China, which has allowed it to compete with the proof of weapons network by these sovereign countries. And so what we're seeing right now is the same strategy being used in the Middle East. So Iran has followed a resistance strategy, which is fight back against the colonization by funding militia groups. The West fight back by funding their own militia groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Iran funds its militia groups like Hezbollah, Hamas, Houthis, and they have their groups. And then obviously you have this media and narrative control around that. But everyone's saying, why aren't the Gulf countries doing anything right now? Now, I believe that is a Western narrative because there is a synergetic strategy. This tension between Saudi Arabia and Iran has led to divide and conquer, forever wars, and a whole economy that's been built around the forever war. Now, China came along as a competing power and said, let's normalize and let's not allow that to happen. I won't create forever wars, but I'd like to invest in a stable region so that we can stop all these forever wars. And so I believe that Iran carried on the resistance, and Saudi and its partners at the Gulf Cooperation Council normalized, and you end up with this ability to negotiate stopping the resistance based upon normalization contracts, where the GCC is negotiating with the Proof of Weapons Network, and they've had to give it a proposal where the forever war and ending, basically demilitarizing Israel, which is a proxy for US imperialism and profits for the military industrial complex, you basically end having a resistance against that, but only if you can give them more profit by finding a finance deal. And because artificial intelligence has come along, using nuclear energy and building data centers into an investable environment that has less destabilization means that the financial industrial complex faction of the Proof of Weapons Network can make up for the profits of expelling the military industrial complex faction, which is a problem for Israel because they relied upon a welfare state of US subsidies and military profits, and there is a power struggle in making that transition. So what has the Gulf countries done in reaction? And so I read everything that's happening this week in GeoPolitics, and I see radically different to what everyone else is seeing. Everyone else says the Gulf countries are traitors, but I actually see deal after deal after deal that is actually going to lead to this deal being done, and eventually have this normalization with Iran that is actually going to lead to the freedom of Palestine and probably a nuclear deal with Iran. And that is the strategic tension that is being played right now. So what did we hear from Macron in France? Well, Macron in France, I quote, said this week, true to its historic commitment to a just and lasting peace in the Middle East, yeah, says the colonizers. It's just gaslighting, isn't it? It's absolutely insane when you know how the world works. They've been funding all these militia groups to steal resources across Africa, colonizing the Middle East, and now they finally buy their freedom because they got enough sovereign wealth. The Macron gets to say our commitment to peace in the Middle East. I have decided that France will recognize the state of Palestine. I will make the solemn announcement at the United Nations General Assembly next September. I think this is this September. I hope that's what he means, this September. And so we are moving towards a deadline of this September. Now, remember, France, UK, China, Russia, and US are on the Security Council. They can veto vote anything. So if you now have France, China, and Russia all voting for a Palestinian cause, you only have UK and America left. And remember, the entire world has already voted for self-determination. It's only US that's propping it up through its bullying in order to make money for military through crimes against humanity. The urgency today is to end the war in Gaza and provide to the citizen population peace is possible. So Macron suddenly has found it in his heart to ignore the genocide that's been happening for 650 days. And suddenly the starvation campaign is so bad that he's had a moral epiphany and he wants to recognize Palestine. Now, call me ignorant, because normally I just say, yeah, this is all words and there's going to be a covert operation. But I believe this time it isn't just talk. This is actually going to happen. Because I'm following the money. And everyone in Bitcoin Hard Talk has been following the money throughout this whole thing. And so September may actually mark the next phase for Palestine that we've never seen before. Now, remember, Goldman Sachs helped create BRICS. And that's the geopolitical side of why BlackRock and the Proof of Weapons Network want this multipolar world. They are financially invested in this world. They're not like representing America first. They want multipolarity because they want to get higher returns from different regions. It was never about, just currency or anything. This has always been about, a portfolio management approach. So what is happening? We saw that France is drawing closer to China, so they announced that deal. I covered why that means the Proof of Weapons Network benefits in part 2 this week in macro, but also China benefits from that deal. And this is after US tariff pressure. So it drew France closer to China, and the Proof of Weapons Network get to benefit, which is against the American interest. But what else did we see? So Macron struck a $40 billion trade deal with Beijing, and we know that the Proof of Weapons Network benefits from that. But Qatar also pledged 2 billion euros in investment into France. And that's going to be invested between 2024 and 2030. And they were negotiating terms. Basically, Qatar is buying soft power and across the entire European Union. So it's taking its sovereign reserves. And while everyone's saying Qatar's not doing anything, Saudi's not doing anything, UAE's not doing anything, they are making it a condition that these European countries recognize Palestine as part of their deals. So this is weakening of Israel, but through negotiations. And I think part of it is for a US military industrial complex exit based upon how much the financial industrial complex can invest in the region, based upon them saying we'll invest in all of these AI companies, while Trump is negotiating foreign direct investment, which means that the Middle East has more control in these negotiations, as the Middle East and the Proof of Weapons Network is fully vassalizing the European Union, UK, and America. And so similar patterns are happening within the Netherlands, Italy, and the UK. Now, remember, the UK is the important one because they're on the Security Council of the United Nations. There is, however, one pushback, which is Germany, because Germany is acting more sovereign. It is under the power of the European Union and the Bank for International Settlements as a proxy, because the Proof of Weapons Network installed their new prime minister. However, they're still doing pushback. So Germany, I believe, represents the military industrial complex faction. So does Israel, whereas America, European Union, and UK represent the financial industrial complex, while Qatar, UAE, and Saudi are negotiating diplomacy while Iran continues the resistance, which is eventually going to lead to this September deadline where I think we get the end result. And suddenly, the UK has had a moral epiphany and can no longer ignore the genocide. Apparently, the genocide is actually a genocide now, and it's a starvation campaign, and things have changed all of a sudden. And what's happening? The EU is essentially being vassalized deeper into the Proof of Weapons Network, while it does deal with the sovereign wealth funds of the Middle East. So the GCC is buying free Palestine. And I don't think this gets recognized, because they don't want you to believe. They want you to believe that these are just puppet governments of Israel who has all the power, that blackmails America, and doesn't benefit America at all. The PSYOP is happening right in front of you, because you can clearly see America's going to be divorcing from Israel. Israel is being turned into a strategic distressed asset for vassalization by the GCC, and all of these negotiations are happening, and the US military industrial complex is weaponizing genocide and starvation to have more power to derail plans so that they can get more strategic assets. This is how the world works. And they're buying them free Palestine rather than dropping bombs, while Iran is doing the military resistance. Now, you want them to start bombing, And that would screw the whole deal up, because this is diplomacy, strategic investment to get to the outcome, while Iran is being painted as the one that's crazy. It all works together in tandem, and I believe that Iran has agreed to the terms, and will get the terms eventually. But at the same time, it needs to remain in line with its ideology. And if you watched any of my previous broadcasts, we did the play-by-play of what happened during the Iran-Israel war, the Iran-Israel war, and how I believe the whole thing was staged, with the exception of Israel going off script by killing civilians and various other things. You can go back to that if not. But essentially, this is China brick-backed diplomacy being negotiated via the GCC, so that the Middle East can sit in the center between BRICS and America. And that's why you're seeing some of the operations from UAE in order to gain more control with their crimes against humanity in Sudan and various other resources and trade routes. But the region is changing, no doubt about it in my mind. Iran empowered basically the physical resistance. And I think it stopped right now, which is why you're not seeing mass chaos. Egypt and Jordan, they resisted the International Monetary Fund, which have essentially vassalized their economies. They were only able to do that because they were meant to ethnically cleanse the Gazans. The Gazans are still there, even though it is complete starvation campaign, heartbreaking. But because Egypt and Jordan were able to resist the IMF, they are able to Gazans are able to stay on their land, despite the fact that US and Israel wanted to destroy Egypt and Jordan by sending them all out there and expanding the war to those regions for the military-industrial complex. It's completely unbearable what we're watching. Again, I'm talking about the financial analysis, but when I'm doing my humanitarian analysis, I mean, it is absolutely unbearable. It's far too slow. It's disgusting to watch the starvation campaign. It's completely inhumane. But when you're following the money, it says that this is going to happen, and we're entering into a different negotiation. And this is how the proof of weapon network operates. It's the war machine. And I think Palestine and Iran have to agree on the final terms. I think there is a struggle there. And I think we're moving towards this September deadline. So what is the next step? I've covered this on others. But essentially, I think you get a Netanyahu exit at some point. He's going to be the scapegoat. You're already starting to see that. The media machine is ratcheting up part of the narrative. But part of his deal is Trump's meant to make him look good. So Trump's saying, you're a war hero. Why would they come after you in the court for your corruption? I'm going to not do a trade deal with Canada because Canada's going to recognize Palestine. After that, I think the Israeli cabinet falls, which is going to be a covert regime change to a Israeli GCC puppet government, like we have in Syria, which is a GCC puppet government. And eventually the US and Israeli military-industrial complex contractors, they do their final bombs and their final profits, which is what we're seeing in Lebanon right now, so they can get as much vassalization. And then eventually the banks are going to take over, and they're going to profit from reconstruction contracts and partnership with the GCC. And that's the only way that you're able to work with the proof of weapons network, is create an environment where peace is more profitable than war. And the only reason they got power is because they maintained their sovereign wealth, and they didn't install a Western debt-backed Ponzi scheme central bank, which was the ultimate tool of the proof of weapons network for complete vassalization. It's completely sick how the proof of weapons network works. It makes me want to puke, but it's how it works. And this is the reality. The starvation campaign that you are seeing right now, as I said, is completely unbearable. But you weren't meant to be. If we weren't coming towards an end of the negotiation, you would never have seen the starvation campaign. And so to manage that divorce, there is a targeted campaign to expose the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is the US operation that I always covered. And I covered in that debate that I put on my previous blog, where people were trying to say I'm a conspiracy theorist by calling it a starvation campaign. And so you're starting to see podcasts like Tucker Carlson, which will interview whistleblowers. And what are those whistleblowers doing? They're saying, this isn't America, this is the IDF, and the IDF are doing it because they don't have the appropriate training. They're using these narratives in order to tell the truth, but manage the divorce and pretend like America, the military-industrial complex, and the proof of weapons network would never engage in genocide or never engage in mass starvation, despite the fact that this is nothing compared to what they did in Iraq. And Julian Assange exposed that to us in WikiLeaks, thanks to his funding through Bitcoin. And this is what has always happened. And they always find a divorce strategy so they can say it was them, it wasn't us. And I hope, that's just the reality of how these things are going to work. But those in Bitcoin Hard Talk will always follow the money and they won't fall for it. And most people will just think that Trump created peace in this whole thing. And America would never do that. It was only because blackmail from Jeffrey Epstein. And we would never engage in anything like that. And that's what the whole interviews are. Exposing the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation while creating plausible deniability and making the American people think that this is some road faction and this would never be how the dollar's propped up. This isn't the American Proof of Weapons Network. So starvation in Gaza is now on the front page of various newspapers. It's being leaked out around the world. This was happening all along. The UK is now saying that it's going to officially recognize Palestine as an independent state in September, unless Israel agrees to a ceasefire. We're getting... Why did the UK do that? Well, follow the money, use the same methodology. There's been massive Qatari investment in the UK. There was recently a deal that was announced, over $50 billion invested into finance, real estate, infrastructure, culture. Qatari own many UK businesses within the UK. They generated $1.3 trillion in revenue between 2008 and 2022. Qatar supported 611,000 jobs in the UK in 2022. There's a joint Royal Air Force and Qatari Typhoon and Hawk squadron operations and development. There's a memorandum of understanding signed to boost the collaboration in fintech and climate change and financial services. The UK and the GCC signed a free trade agreement that's estimated to boost UK trade with the Gulf countries to approximately £8.6 billion annually. And that's going to be kicking in by 2035. And suddenly Keir Starmer has figured out that the starvation is unbearable. I don't know how this happened. We must act right now, and we must do this in line with British values. We must defend democracy. And suddenly, all of a sudden, he cares. And we're told that the Gulf countries aren't doing anything. Italy says it can no longer accept massacres and famine in Gaza. Quote from Italy representative: the world could no longer look away. We can no longer look away. And it just so happens that India, Italy, and Qatar have in 2026, they're starting a 27-year LNG agreement that was being negotiated for the sale and purchase of up to 1 million tons of LNG per annum. And suddenly, what happens with Netherlands, the Dutch Empire, the Netherlands national coordinator for terrorism and security, NCTV, has come out and said Israel is threatening the state actor alongside Iran, Russia, and Turkey. So now they put terrorist status for Israel. So the proof of weapons network is using the same mechanisms that they used on everyone else against itself. And why did Netherlands suddenly just figure out that this humanitarian crisis is happening after all of them weaponized Israel in order to blow up children, and they all knew what was happening all along? Suddenly they're banning Smoldrich and Gavir. Oh yeah, the cabinet members that are going to fall, that are going to be part of the regime change. We need to make them terrorists. They're not allowed to enter the Netherlands. Suddenly we're realizing, even though from day one they were saying they were going to wipe out all the Palestinians. Why? Because one of Qatari's largest and most strategic LNG supply contracts in Europe happens to be securing major shares of Netherlands' future gas imports. In fact, 3.5 million tons per annum starting in 2026. France had the third largest annual Qatar and France strategic dialogue held on June the 12th, 2025. And Macron suddenly comes out and they want to recognize Palestine. It's getting unbearable right now. They signed with Qatar a security and defense cooperation, an economic and trade partnership, an investment facilitation agreement, an education and cultural exchange, and Qatar pledged $10 billion of euros investment in France up to 2030. This isn't a moral awakening by quote unquote Western values. This is the proof of weapons network using crony capitalism in order to strategically steal from the Europeans and put the crony capitalism up to the top so that the Qataris, the Saudis, and the Emiratis, and the Kuwaitis, and the GCC can all buy their freedom and have to work with the proof of weapons network in order to resolve the Palestinian cause. So anybody that says that they're doing nothing just doesn't understand that there is a two-tiered strategy, which is the physical resistance, which required the China backing, normalization, and the negotiation power based upon sovereign wealth. And this is a major signal that America's proxy Israel is going to be abandoned by the military-industrial complex. All of the different media that you're seeing right now, it means that I believe there is progress between the Proof of Weapons Network and the Gulf Cooperation Council on a deal, and they remain aligned right now. And military representing Netanyahu, backed up by Germany, is the one, and US are the final stragglers in terms of what the deal looks like for them. And Netanyahu's using that and using genocide in order to negotiate better terms. This is the way the Proof of Weapons Network operates. This is how it conducts its activities. And this is how it works with foreign countries. And this is the rational process if you follow the money and understand how the network works. So it conducts wars for the profits of propping up the dollar, for the Proof of Weapons Network, for the military-industrial complex faction that controls the deep state actors like CIA, Mossad, and MI6. And then it conducts reconstruction contracts afterwards, after creating the war and rebuilding better. And then it will have its hotels and its consumption and its loans and the financial industrial complex, the banks, the asset managers. They manage their portfolio, and Trump gets to build a Trump Tower, because they have the power of the asset management that they're able to negotiate these deals. This is what props up the dollar. This is why foreign policy is a sham. No one's defending democracy. This is neo-colonialism that still exists today. And this is what following the money tells you. This is exactly how the operation works. They hedge through the hedge funds when operations don't go well. So please don't fall for anything. America's the largest sponsor of state terrorism in the world. And it is all for propping up the profits and printing GDP and growth to push up the stock market based upon death, destruction, and never is that more clear than the operation that we're seeing in Way. So that's what I think we're seeing right now. What I wanted to do is play you one final video, which is going to close us out. And so when you see in the media these suddenly, people that come out and expose the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, I'm grateful for it. But throughout the whole time, we've been exposing it, and we've been called anti-Semitic, conspiracy theorists, doomers, liars, stealers, cheaters throughout the whole thing. And suddenly, it's not until someone comes on Tucker Carlson and says that this is what's happening that most people are actually going to believe it. And so, Azad, let's play the final video that's going to close us out, and then we'll have our final comments for this week in GeoPolitics.
I witnessed Palestinian parents, mothers and fathers, carrying their dead children in their arms, skeletons. I witnessed that. I've witnessed people that have come onto the sites that you can see that they are just completely emaciated and starving. That's not fake. If the deniers want to think that we got Stanley Kubrick to go into Gaza and take a bunch of crisis actors and shoot a film on to fake this starvation, but it's real and people are dying. At this point right now, because we, the United States, the Gaza Humanitarian Fund, put up our hand and said, we'll do it. The starvation at this point has gotten worse than it was before, because the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation's process is leading to that starvation because it's not delivering enough aid, not even nearly enough, not even nearly to be a fraction of enough.
All right. I hope you understand how the world works right now. So go over to that blog post where I had that debate if you'd like to watch that and see how the gaslighting works and all the name calling and all the anti-Semitism they call you and all the conspiracy theorists they call you and all the doomerism. Because for the last 2 years on X Spaces, we've been saying this, and we've had agents up on Spaces that are paid in order to give state propaganda to justify the injustifiable. I hope you remember all of this documentation, and remember years from now, our grandchildren and our children are going to watch these documentations, and I want to have every one of those spaces on my blog backed up, because you know that there is going to be a whitewashing campaign to rewrite history. And the Proof of Weapons Network in America is doing that right now to say, hey, we would never do this. We had to be blackmailed by Jeffrey Epstein to do this. It was just them. It wasn't us. And all the plausible deniability and everything's coming out right now to make you believe that you come from the ethical high ground because your country, which executed this genocide, and it's why I stand up against my government, and we don't get to say we're the greatest country in the world while we're doing crimes against humanity. And I'm sorry to give you the red pill, but the red pill, without it, you can't have peace. You can't have peace without truth. And we need truth. And that's our duty. That's our freedom of speech. That's what we're meant to use it for while we have it, because the algorithm is shadow banning. I gave the example in part 1 of what happened with that video and how they suppress, which is why I rely upon you to share this stuff. And it's why we back it up on the blog so that we can get these messages out to as many people. Now, the red pill is dark once you take it, because you can't imagine how this Proof of Weapons Network could be so evil. But we do have the antithesis, and the antithesis is the orange pill. And the orange pill is we can opt out from the Proof of Weapons Network by boycotting the Federal Reserve, by saving our money in Bitcoin. We can boycott BlackRock, the CEO of the Proof of Weapons Network, by owning our own Bitcoin in self-custody. We can be more conscious with our money, and we cannot borrow. We don't have to borrow against our Bitcoin by beating the market and doing it for long-term thinking, changing your time preference, and saving in Bitcoin every month, own more Bitcoin each month, and do it for a minimum of 4 years and outperform Wall Street so that you don't need to borrow from the banks, and we can boycott the banks. And we can be more conscious with our money, and we can recognize that our governments are subordinate to a proof of weapons network. And engaging in politics is us playing around with politicians that were blackmailed, compromised, and selected by the proof of weapons network so that we can be distracted in this Republican versus Democrat, Labor versus conservative, kabuki theater of BS, so that you don't understand the real forces that control the world, which is the proof of weapons network. And guess what? They need our money for their profits. And if we can be more conscious by selling their shares and taking control of our money and not consuming from them wherever we can. Obviously, we are moving to a world of Bitcoin AI and artificial intelligence. We have to be productive, so we can't boycott to the extent that we would like to, because we need to be productive in our monetary activism. But shutting down dissent, and people that want to expose the system is by calling them anti-Semitic doomers or calling them conspiracy theorists. Yeah, there's a bunch of stuff where we may be a little bit off track, but we're never going to know the truth because they're never going to tell you. And we have to follow the money, and we have to connect dots. And when I'm wrong, I'll say I'm wrong. But I think in the general direction, this directionally gets you in the right place of where we're going. And we will keep following the money, and I will keep doing Bitcoin Hard Talk until I can't talk no more, because for every last savings, we need to be more conscious with our money. And I'm going to give more and more content until we get there. So that's going to do everything for this week in Bitcoin, macro, and geopolitics. If you only watch this section, we split it up into 3. On the blog, we'll link to all the different parts. You can get little AI summaries if you don't have time. You can download it on Apple Podcast as well as Spotify, and watch it piece by piece. And watch it with no extra time while you're working out or whatever you're doing or driving. In case YouTube bans us, follow me on Rumble. I'm building up a little following there because we'll switch to that if YouTube bans me. We've now got 100,000 subscribers, and YouTube sent us the little silver plaque. Thanks to all of you for contributing to that. But let's get to 210,000 subscribers in commemoration of the 21 million Bitcoin, and let's go beyond there, one step at a time. Always remember, you are alive at one of the most interesting times in financial history. Some are going to get wrecked, others are going to do really well, and I want you to be on the right side of that change. So head over to Simon, get your free login to the Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal, get all the free resources, and join my newsletter so that I can at least keep you up to date, because unfortunately we are being massively shadow banned, as with the experiment that we did. All we want to do is share this message with as many people as possible in peace, love, and unity, and break it down into smaller chunks so that it's consumable as possible. But I will keep delivering this long form content and break it down. And I'll see you this time next week for Bitcoin Hard Talk episode 93. Peace.